Hello, curious minds, and welcome to Documentary for Sleep. If you're here tonight, maybe your thoughts are still awake, circling questions that won't quite rest. Or maybe you simply want a gentle story to keep you company as you drift towards sleep. Either way, you've found the right place. Whether you're lying in bed, resting after a long day, or letting this play quietly in the background while you cook, study, or work through the night. This is your moment to slow down and wander back into some of humanity's oldest questions. Tonight, we'll explore morality, the invisible web of rules and feelings that guides how we treat one another. Why do we help, share, or feel guilt when we harm? Is morality something we humans created, a cultural invention to hold communities together? Or is it an instinct older than culture itself, a product of evolution that allowed our ancestors to survive by cooperating? We don't pretend to hold all the answers, but what we do have are the bones, the clues, and the questions, drawn from anthropology, psychology, and evolutionary science, that let us look at morality not as commandments written in stone, but as a human story still unfolding. And if you happen to drift off along the way, that's perfectly fine. This is a safe place to close your eyes and let sleep take over. I've left timestamps in the description so you can return tomorrow and pick up exactly where you left off, because this journey is worth hearing in full. And if you enjoy this kind of calm, long-form storytelling, gentle science for curious sapiens, consider liking and subscribing. It helps this channel reach others who might also be looking for a quieter way to learn and wonder. I'd also love to know, how do you listen? Are you tucked into bed or keeping company with these words during a night shift somewhere far away? And as always, stay curious, stay calm. Deep within a cave in the mountains of northern Spain, the earth held a secret for nearly 500,000 years. It was not a treasure of gold or glittering jewels, but a story written in bone. When archaeologists carefully unearthed a collection of ancient remains, one skull stood apart. Designated Cranium 17, it belonged to a young adult of a now extinct cousin of our own species. The silence of its resting place was broken by a violent tale. There on the frontal bone were 2 fractures, perfectly circular, identical in size and trajectory. They were not the result of a fall or a clumsy accident. They were the unmistakable signature of a blunt force impact, delivered not once, but twice, with a chilling, mechanical precision. This was not an accident of prehistoric life. This was a killing, a deliberate, calculated act of violence that ended a life in the deep dark. If we follow the thread of our own biology, we find that the capacity for such violence is not ours alone. Our primate cousins, the chimpanzees, engage in calculated raids and brutal killings. It is a strategic violence, a grim tool for territory and power. Yet, it remains a rare event, an outlier in the complex tapestry of their social bonds. So, if this ancient human relative indeed fell by a planned strike from another of its kind, it forces a deeply unsettling question into the ancient gloom. Did the one who swung the club, the one who ended a life with 2 efficient blows, understand the weight of that action? Was there, in that proto-human mind, a flicker of recognition that this was a transgression, a line crossed? Or was it merely the removal of an obstacle, as uncomplicated as swatting a fly? Cranium 17 now sits as the earliest known, most compelling evidence of a homicide. It is a singular data point screaming from the depths of time. And the context, or rather the lack of it, is just as telling. There was no careful burial here, no grave goods placed tenderly beside the body as we find in later Neanderthal and human sites. There was no ceremony, no final respect paid to the departed. The body was simply left, discarded. Does this absence of ritual suggest an absence of concept? Was the moral universe of these beings, the shared understanding of right and wrong, the sacredness of a life, still a dawn yet to break? Without words to encode it, could a sense of sin even exist? We live now in a world where murder is the ultimate taboo, a near universal crime across every human culture. Our laws, our religions, our very social contracts are built upon its prohibition. We like to believe this revulsion is innate, a fundamental part of being human. But the story of Cranium 17 whispers a more inconvenient truth. It suggests that morality, as we know it, might not be a default setting hardwired into our species. Perhaps it is not a seed planted at our inception, but a cultural invention, a delicate and hard-won covenant forged in the fires of necessity much later in our story. Could our deepest ethical truths be learned behaviors, not innate instincts? And yet, this grim evidence creates its own paradox. If our ancient ancestors were so naturally prone to lethal violence without a second thought, how did we ever survive? How did the fragile, interdependent human group, reliant on sharing food, caring for young, and defending against predators, ever cohere? Unless, of course, the act of killing was not the norm, but the terrifying exception that proved the rule. Perhaps it was the ultimate violation of a simpler, earlier code, a code of fairness, of reciprocity, of group survival. Maybe the killer knew it was wrong not by some divine law, but because it broke a practical, unspoken pact that held the tribe together. The violence itself might be the dark proof that a sense of justice, however primitive, already lived among them. So the question shifts. It is no longer simply about the act of death, but about the mind that conceived it. The true mystery locked within Cranium 17 is not the force of the blow, but the consciousness behind it. Can a sense of right and wrong take root and grow in a mind without words to name it? Can morality exist as a pure, wordless feeling, a cold stone of dread in the gut after the deed is done? This solitary death speaks of a darkness within, but what of the light? What happens when we find evidence not of a life taken, but of a life painfully, tenderly sustained? In the deep, silent earth of Shanidar Cave in Iraq, the dust settled not just on bones, but on a mystery. Archaeologists unearthed the skeleton of a Neanderthal man, an individual who would come to be known as Shanidar I. His remains told a story written in trauma: a crushed eye socket, suggesting blindness, a withered arm, likely amputated long before death, and a crippling injury to his leg. This was a man who lived in a world of stone and ice, a world of constant physical demand. He could not hunt. He could not easily flee. Yet the bones whispered a startling truth. He had survived for years, perhaps a decade or more, after these devastating injuries. In an existence defined by survival of the fittest, who would carry such a burden? Who had cared for him? The animal kingdom offers a stark contrast: a wounded chimpanzee, a limping baboon. They are often left behind, their weakness a liability the troop cannot afford. The logic is cold, clean, and brutally efficient. Yet, here was a different calculus at work. The prolonged survival of Shanidar I points not to a moment of pity, but to a system of sustained care. It suggests food was shared, wounds were cleaned, and a place by the fire was kept warm. This compels a biological question. Do we carry within our very DNA, inherited from these ancient cousins, a silent instruction for altruism? Is there a gene for compassion that flickered to life not in our cities, but in their caves, offering a selective advantage not to the individual, but to the group that holds itself together? Shanidar I was not an anomaly. Across other Neanderthal sites, we find similar fragments of a caring consciousness. There are graves adorned with flowers, bodies carefully arranged in sleep-like postures, and the preserved skulls of ancestors, perhaps kept as tangible memories. These are not the actions of mere beasts. They are the nascent stirrings of a moral world. This was a primal ethic, born long before philosophy put it into words. It was the understanding that an individual's value was not solely in their strength or their contribution to the hunt, but in their very existence as part of a whole. The community began to see itself in the suffering of the one, and in doing so, discovered its own humanity. What does it mean for our own morality to know it was forged, not in libraries, but in the act of offering a drink of water to a dying friend? In our modern world, we frame such acts as the bedrock of humanism, the product of enlightened compassion. We build complex ethical systems and hospitals that gleam under fluorescent lights, believing we have ascended from a baser nature. But if the seed of this behavior was already buried in the cold, hard ground of a Neanderthal burial, then perhaps morality does not need a theory to exist. Maybe it simply is, a fundamental part of the human condition that emerges as naturally as language. Could it be that our grand philosophies are merely elegant translations of a much older, much deeper song already humming in our bones? Yet, we must pause at this warm glow of innate goodness and consider a colder, more pragmatic possibility. Was this care truly selfless? In a landscape of scarcity, every action is an investment. An elder, even a broken one, is a library of hard-won knowledge. They remember the path of the migrating herds, the properties of medicinal plants, the techniques for working flint. Keeping them alive was a survival strategy, a way of preserving the collective memory of the group. In this light, the compassion shown to Shanidar one looks less like pure altruism and more like a profound unconscious pragmatism. Was it love, or was it a long-term calculation, an early form of insurance paid for with scraps of food? This leaves us suspended between two truths, between the selfless and the selfish, between the heart and the head. So when does compassion cross the threshold from a survival instinct into a conscious belief? The answer to that profound transition might not lie in the bones of a Neanderthal, but in the present-day behavior of our closest living relatives. It might be found in the simple, puzzling act of a chimpanzee, sitting in the dappled jungle light, voluntarily extending its hand to offer a share of its meal. Why would it ever do such a thing? In a quiet research enclosure, a chimpanzee pauses. In its hand is a piece of banana, a prized reward. Another chimp, one who had nothing, watches. Without a threat, without a command, the first chimp breaks the fruit and offers half. It is a gesture that feels, to our human eyes, strangely kind. This simple act sends a ripple through our understanding of morality. If such behavior exists outside the human sphere, untouched by religion or philosophy, then where does our own sense of right and wrong truly begin? The answer is not found in a single moment of generosity, but woven into the very fabric of our shared biology. It is a story written in genes and social bonds, a narrative that begins not with a commandment, but with a calculation. The chimpanzee doesn't hand over the banana out of abstract virtue. It is often repaying a debt. This is the foundation of what science calls reciprocal altruism, a form of conditional giving. I scratch your back, and somewhere down the line, you will scratch mine. It is a transaction, but one that requires memory, trust, and a sense of future. This tit-for-tat exchange is the raw evolutionary bedrock upon which far more complex structures could be built. Could this basic calculus of give and take be the primordial seed from which the towering tree of human ethics eventually grew? To find the answer, we must journey back, long before cities or laws, to the ancient savannas where our ancestors struggled to survive. Their world was not won by the strongest individual, but by the most cohesive group. Survival was a collective project. The act of sharing food after a hunt, of dividing labor, of caring for the young that were not one's own. These were not lofty ideals. They were essential strategies. A tribe that shared its meat and its responsibilities stood a better chance against predators and famine than a band of selfish brutes. The first moral code might not have been written on stone tablets, but enacted around a fire, passed from hand to hand in the form of a shared meal. This nascent morality was the glue of community, the invisible bond that turned a collection of individuals into a tribe. Was this the moment sharing ceased to be just a transaction and began its slow evolution into a value? We see this legacy echoed in our nurseries today. One of the very first social lessons we impart to a child is the imperative to share. We coax and praise, shaping this behavior as if we are instilling a uniquely human virtue. But the chimpanzee in its enclosure never sat through a lesson on morality. It never heard a fable about the virtues of kindness. Its actions emerge from a deeper, older wellspring. So, when we teach our children to share, are we teaching them something new? Or are we merely nurturing a seed that was planted millions of years ago, a fundamental piece of our biological inheritance that we have since draped in the language of ethics and duty? Is our morality a cultural invention or a natural emergence? Yet the plot thickens. The chimpanzee's generosity is not boundless. It is shrewd, even strategic. It shares most readily with those who have shared before, with kin, or with allies who might be useful later. The sharing is a down payment on a future favor, a currency in the economy of social connection. So is this truly morality, or is it merely a sophisticated, self-interested trade? Have we, in our admiration, mistaken a clever survival tactic for a spark of virtue? Does the presence of a calculated motive strip the act of its moral weight, or does it reveal the humble, pragmatic origins of what we now call goodness? Perhaps the divide is not so clear. Perhaps true altruism, the pure, selfless kind, was not the starting point. Maybe morality did not begin with a grand gesture of kindness, but with a quiet, evolutionary whisper of wisdom. It began with the simple, powerful understanding that cooperation is a better long-term strategy than conflict, that generosity can be a form of insurance, and that trust is the most valuable currency of all. The act of sharing a banana, then, is not less profound for being calculated. It is the foundation upon which more complex moral reasoning could be built. But if this is where it starts, with a transaction, where does it go? What evolutionary leap allows for forgiveness, for kindness toward a stranger who can offer nothing in return? What of the bonobo, our other close relative, who chooses a different path entirely? When tensions rise within a bonobo community, they do not reach for a club. They reach for each other. They diffuse conflict with grooming, with embraces, with sexual contact, a stunningly different strategy for building peace. If both chimpanzees and bonobos, our genetic mirrors, hold up different reflections of our own nature, one of calculated reciprocity and the other of empathetic connection, then which one tells the older story? Which path did we first walk down, and when did we choose to start walking another? The air hangs heavy in the humid Congo basin, thick with the tension of a recent squabble. A coveted fruit, a misplaced shove, a sharp vocalization that cuts through the green stillness. In another primate society, this would be the prelude to violence, a flurry of teeth and fury to re-establish a brittle hierarchy. But here, in the dappled light, something else unfolds. The two bonobos approach each other, not with bared canines, but with a softness that seems to defy the primal logic of conflict. They embrace, they nuzzle, they engage in a fleeting, almost casual sexual act. And just like that, the tension dissolves, the social fabric is rewoven, and the troop moves on, a cohesive whole once more. This is not a human therapy session. It is the daily reality of our closest genetic cousins. Why would such complex conciliatory behavior evolve? Is this the simple, instinctual precursor to what we, in our immense complexity, call morality? Genetically, we are nearly twins, separated by a mere sliver of evolutionary time. Bonobos and chimpanzees share about 98.7% of their DNA with humans, a fact that often leads us to look into their eyes and see a familiar, if wilder, version of ourselves. Yet, their paths diverged profoundly when the Congo River formed a natural barrier roughly 2 million years ago. The chimpanzees on the north bank faced competition with gorillas for resources, a pressure that may have favored aggression, territoriality, and the formation of male-dominated coalitions built on power and fear. Their world is a political landscape, a constant negotiation of strength. But the bonobos, isolated on the south bank, found themselves in a veritable Eden, a lush land abundant with food and free from guerrilla competition. In this cradle of plenty, the evolutionary pressures shifted. The drive to constantly compete and dominate became an unnecessary risk, a waste of precious energy. Instead, the individuals who thrived were those who could maintain social cohesion, who could diffuse conflict quickly and efficiently ensuring the group's stability and their own place within it. Their sociosexuality, using sexual contact for greeting, conflict resolution, and social bonding, became the glue of their society, a biological tool for peace. It is a stunningly elegant evolutionary adaptation. When survival is better guaranteed by cooperation than by conquest, empathy becomes the sharpest tool in the box. But does this mean the bonobo's embrace is a calculated strategy, or is it something more deeply instinctively felt? This impulse to reconcile, to mend the social tear after a conflict, is not a bizarre anomaly unique to bonobos. The archaeological record, that silent library of our own past, whispers of similar instincts buried deep within us. We find graves, tens of thousands of years old, where an elderly individual was carefully interred, their arthritic bones and missing teeth suggesting they were cared for long after they could contribute to the hunt or the gather. This is not pragmatic, it is profoundly social. We find caches of obsidian tools traded over astonishing distances, evidence of networks that required trust, reciprocity, and the ability to peacefully interact with strangers beyond one's immediate kin. These artifacts are the fossilized echoes of reconciliation. They suggest that for early human bands, survival was not just a matter of the strongest arm or the sharpest spear. It was about the strength of the bond. A group that could quickly recover from internal strife, that could share resources without constant infighting, and that could form alliances with others, held a decisive advantage. The individual who could apologize or offer a gift to smooth over a transgression was not weak, they were essential. They were the social engineers ensuring the survival of the tribe. So, were our ancestors, in their struggle for existence, tapping into the same deep wellspring of social repair that the bonobos use? Is our need to make amends as ancient and as fundamental as our need to eat and breathe? In our modern, hyper-rational world, we have neatly categorized these behaviors under the label of soft skills. We teach children to say, sorry. We encourage a hug after a fight, and we see diplomacy as a sophisticated human invention. We frame morality as a learned code, a set of rules and laws painstakingly built over millennia of civilization and religion. We absolve ourselves of our baser instincts by claiming the mantle of a higher, rational ethics. But the bonobo holds up a mirror, and the reflection is unsettlingly simple. They achieve social harmony without holy books, without court systems, without philosophical treatises on virtue. Their reconciliation is immediate, visceral, and effective. This forces a deeply philosophical question. What if our moral impulses are not taught, but caught? What if the feeling of unease when we have wronged someone, the urge to make it right, the empathy we feel for another's pain? What if these are not cultural constructs, but biological inheritances? The bonobo suggests that the foundation of our morality is not carved in stone tablets, but woven into our very DNA, a legacy from a time when group cohesion was the ultimate currency. Yet, to see the bonobo as a furry, pacifist saint is to fall into another trap. Their reconciliations are powerful, but they are also transient, emotional, and lacking in abstract thought. A bonobo does not lie awake at night wrestling with the philosophical concept of justice. It acts on an immediate urge to restore emotional equilibrium. It feels the tension and acts to dissolve it. This is where the human story seems to diverge, to add a new and perplexing layer. We took that raw, emotional impulse and we built cathedrals of law upon it. We created concepts of fairness, justice, and rights that exist independently of our fleeting feelings. We can act morally even when we don't feel like it, because we understand a principle that exists beyond the moment. So, does this mean our morality is merely a polished, intellectualized version of a bonobo's instinct? Or did we stumble upon something entirely different? Is the human sense of right and wrong a sophisticated extension of an ancient emotional reflex, or is it a radical departure into the realm of reason? The bonobo's embrace offers a profound, beautiful, and deeply challenging model. It suggests that peace is not a lofty human ideal we must struggle to reach, but perhaps a potential that was always within us, a thread in our primal genetic fabric. It implies that our moral compass might have its true north in the emotional, social world of our ancestors. But if that is true, if the urge for harmony is indeed an instinct, then what are we to make of the vast, cold, and often brutal architecture of human ethics? Have we simply dressed up an ancient animal impulse in the language of law and philosophy, pretending it is something more? Or, in the space between that instinctual embrace and our complex moral reasoning, did we somehow birth a new form of existence? To find the next layer of this truth, perhaps we should not look to our closest cousins, but to our newest members. We must look to a human infant who has yet to be taught a single rule and see what innate sense of fairness it already holds in its unlearned heart. Does a sense of right and wrong begin not with a lesson, but with a feeling? In a softly lit room, a baby of just 6 months sits on its parent's lap, its wide eyes fixed on a simple puppet stage. On one side, a friendly puppet diligently divides a small pile of crackers into 2 equal stacks. On the other, a different puppet greedily shovels most of the crackers toward itself, leaving a paltry few for its companion. This is not mere child's play. It is a meticulously designed experiment. When offered a choice between the 2 puppets, the infant, with a hand still learning the art of grasping, almost universally reaches for the fair one. There is no language here, no instruction, no past experience to draw from. Yet the choice is clear. Why? What silent compass is guiding this tiny human's hand toward fairness, toward a form of justice it cannot possibly name? This seemingly simple preference hints at a profound architectural feature of the human mind. Evolutionary psychology suggests that the recognition of fairness is not a complex lesson learned through years of socialization, but rather a foundational module, pre-installed in the wetware of our brains. It appears to be a biological default, a primitive moral setting. From the very beginning, our neural circuitry seems tuned to detect balance and imbalance in social exchanges. This innate ability would have served a critical survival function for a profoundly social species. An individual who could instinctively identify and align with cooperative, fair-minded partners would have a far greater chance of thriving within a group. Conversely, an instinctual aversion to freeloaders and cheats would protect the individual from exploitation. This is not about conscious calculation. It is a deeper, more ancient form of social calculus, written into our genes not as a lofty ideal, but as a practical tool for collective survival. The infant's reach, then, is not a moral choice in the philosophical sense, but a biological reflex, an evolutionary echo urging it toward the collaborators and away from the predators. Is our deepest sense of right and wrong, then, merely a sophisticated extension of a survival algorithm? To understand the immense selective pressure that would have hardwired such a reflex, we must journey back through millennia to the long stretch of human history where the group was the individual's only cradle and shield. In hunter-gatherer societies, existence was a precarious balance between caloric intake and output. A successful hunt provided a windfall of resources, but one that was utterly dependent on group cohesion and shared effort. The evidence from these ancient campsites is subtly telling. We find stone tools napped from the same core, distributed among the group, suggesting a shared toolkit and, by extension, a shared purpose. Analysis of animal bones around ancient hearths shows cut marks consistent with the systematic division of meat, a practice of sharing that ensured no member of the band, not even the temporarily ill or unlucky hunter, would starve. In such a world, a hoarder was not just selfish. They were a direct threat to the unit's integrity. A group fractured by perceived injustice was a group moments away from dissolution, and dissolution in that environment was a death sentence for all. Fairness, in its most visceral form, was the glue that held the world together. It was the practical, non-negotiable price of a shared future. Could any force be more powerful in sculpting our innate preferences than this stark existential arithmetic? And yet, in our modern world, we often assume that morality is something we impart, a software we download into our children through stories, rules, and gentle corrections. We teach them to play fair, to take turns, to share. We see ourselves as architects of their conscience. But the infant in the lab challenges this assumption. The child chooses the fair puppet long before it can comprehend the words we use to teach these lessons. This suggests that our moral education does not write on a blank slate, but rather tunes an instrument that is already strung. We are not pouring water into an empty vessel. We are channeling a river that already flows from a deep internal spring. Our social norms and laws may elaborate, refine, and complicate this innate impulse, but they do not create it from nothing. The foundation is already there, laid down by millions of years of evolutionary pressure. A neural predisposition to find comfort in equity and unease in inequity. So, when we teach a child about fairness, are we truly instructing them? Or are we simply speaking a language their brain is already primed to understand? A necessary counterpoint emerges, casting a shadow of doubt on this grand narrative of innate morality. Perhaps we are overinterpreting the reach of a baby's hand. Could their preference be driven by something far simpler, something more primal than a moral compass? Maybe the fair puppet is just more pleasant to look at. Its movements are predictable, its outcome balanced, creating a sense of order and harmony that is inherently more appealing to the developing brain. The unfair puppet creates a scene of conflict, dissonance, and disruption, a negative stimulus that the infant simply wishes to avoid. In this view, the choice is not a vote for justice, but a search for comfort. It is an aesthetic preference for symmetry over chaos, not an ethical judgment against greed. Does this reduction rob the act of its meaning, or does it reveal that our deepest moral intuitions are built upon a bedrock of simple, emotional responses to patterns of social harmony and discord? This line of questioning inevitably spirals inward, toward the mechanisms that must underpin any cooperative society. If the preference for fairness is indeed an ingrained instinct, a reflex that draws us toward equitable partners, then what of its necessary counterpart, the aversion to those who violate the norm? Is the impulse to punish, to impose a cost on the unfair, the cheat, the free rider, also a reflexive part of our moral hardware? This would not be punishment as a calculated act of retribution, nor as a taught rule of conduct. It would be something more immediate, more visceral, a moral immune response, a swift, almost automatic reaction to isolate a social pathogen and protect the health of the collective body. It would be the dark twin of the infant's reach, the flip side of the same evolutionary coin. But if such a reflex exists, can it ever be separated from the violence that so often accompanies it? Or is the desire to see fairness enforced itself a potential seed of conflict, a paradox where the defense of a moral order requires the threat of its violation? This thought lingers, unresolved, a question hanging in the air much like the infant's hand, poised between two puppets. It pulls our gaze forward, to a much older scene, a quieter testimony. In the dry earth of Sudan, from a time 14,000 years past, we find a different kind of choice being made. A human skull, buried with care, and placed beside it, not food for a journey, but a spear point, a tool of hunting and of war. Was this an act of respect, a final gift to an honored member of the tribe? Or was it something more, the first fragile whisper of a belief that the rules of fairness, the bonds of the group, and the consequences for breaking them might somehow extend beyond the threshold of life itself? What obligation follows us into the dark? The sand here remembers everything. For 14,000 years, it has held this secret close to its breast, a silent witness to a moment of profound care. In what is now Sudan, a body was laid to rest. But this was not a mere disposal of remains, not an act of turning away from decay. This was a preparation. Beside the bones, carefully arranged, were weapons of flint and bone, their edges still speaking of a sharp purpose. There were tools, the daily companions of a life of survival. And there, resting against the fragile arch of the throat, a necklace, a collection of shells and teeth, a testament to beauty crafted in a hard world. They sent this one on their way with their most valued possessions, the most practical and the most personal. It is a gesture that echoes across the millennia, instantly recognizable in its tenderness, yet utterly alien in its context. We look at this grave and we understand the grief, but the logic escapes us. Why? What use is a spear to dust? What need has silence for beauty? This impulse to bury, to curate the final resting place of another, is a line in the sand that separates our genus from all other life on Earth. No animal, no matter how intelligent, no matter how social, engages in this ritualized interment. A chimpanzee may show curiosity or fear toward a dead companion, but it will eventually move on, leaving the body to the indifferent cycle of the forest. The human act of burial is something else entirely. It is an act that requires a cognitive leap beyond the immediate, beyond the sensory world. It demands the ability to project a narrative onto the void, to imagine that the person who was, in some form, still is. That the consciousness, the essence, the memory of the individual has merely relocated to a place we cannot see. This is perhaps the primordial spark, the first faint glimmer of a concept that would come to dominate human thought, the spirit. And with the spirit comes a new, terrifying, and beautiful responsibility. If the dead are still present in some form, then our actions toward them matter. We are accountable to an audience we cannot see. This is the birth of an ethics that transcends life itself, a morality that is not bound by the pragmatic rules of the living community, but extends into the unseen, demanding respect, offering comfort, and perhaps pleading for forgiveness. Does our morality, then, begin not with a law for the living, but with a gift for the dead? This was not an isolated moment of sentiment. From the caves of Europe to the plains of Africa and the river valleys of Asia, the archaeological record tells the same story, emerging with a curious simultaneity across the ancient world. Around this period, alongside these deliberate burials, we see an explosion of symbolism, ochre paint staining bones, abstract carvings on cave walls, ritual objects that hold no apparent utilitarian value. It is as if a switch was flipped in the human mind, illuminating a new internal landscape. Many anthropologists see in these graves the earliest fossilized evidence of a belief in a world beyond, and with it, the nascent concept of cosmic justice. The goods placed in the grave are not merely supplies, they are provisions for a journey, an investment in the fate of the soul. This implies a belief that actions in this life might have consequences in the next, that the generous hunter might be rewarded and the cheat might be left wanting. Was this the original scaffolding upon which all religious morality was built? Not a divine commandment etched in stone, but a human intuition whispered over a grave, a hope that the universe might, in the end, balance its accounts? We like to think of our modern ethical systems as sophisticated constructs, built upon reasoned philosophy and enlightened self-interest. We speak of karma, of divine judgment, of heaven and hell, of the universal laws of human rights. We believe we act rightly because it is rational, because it is fair, because it is right. But what if the foundation of this immense, sprawling edifice is far older and more instinctual? What if our belief in a moral order, that goodness is rewarded and evil punished, if not here then somewhere else, is not a cultural invention, but a deep, inherited predisposition? The individual in that Sudanese grave was equipped for an afterlife tens of thousands of years before the great religions formalized the doctrine. This suggests the seed of the idea was planted long before it flowered into theology. Is our thirst for justice, our need to believe that death is not the final arbiter, a part of our biological firmware? Are we, in our courtrooms and our churches and our quiet moral deliberations, simply obeying an ancient whisper from the dust? And yet, we must be cautious not to read too much into the silence of the past. The grandeur of a full-blown spiritual belief system, with its codes and its cosmologies, is a heavy cloak to drape over the shoulders of a single grieving individual. Perhaps the truth in that Sudanese grave is simpler, more intimate, and no less profound. Perhaps it was not about morality or the afterlife at all. Perhaps it was just love, a raw, unbearable sense of loss. A partner could not bear to part with the spear that had fed them. A child could not remove the necklace that had always adorned their parent. The act of placing these items in the ground might have been a final, futile act of connection, a desperate attempt to soothe the living heart, not to provision the dead soul. Is the need to comfort ourselves in the face of the unbearable the true origin of our greatest abstractions? Can profound philosophy be born from simple, selfish sorrow? When compassion extends beyond the boundary of death, perhaps that is the precise moment where morality begins. It is a covenant made with the unseen, a promise that our duty to one another does not end with the last breath. But a feeling, however profound, is not a system. For a group to survive, this nascent empathy must be codified, given teeth, and made into a common law. It must evolve from a private ritual into a public compact. The gift in the grave is the spark, but what are the rules that keep the fire burning among the living? How does a group of equals, without kings or police, enforce the idea of what is right? Imagine a band of hunters, their survival hinging on perfect cooperation. The code is clear, the meat is shared, the weak are protected, the hunt is a collective effort. But then, one among them breaks the code. He takes more than his share, or he hoards a prime tool, or he feigns injury to avoid danger. The act threatens the fragile balance of the group. There is no prison to throw him in, no written law to condemn him by. There is only the weight of shared understanding and the collective will to survive. The punishment is social, immediate, and devastating. Ostracism, a loss of status, a withholding of cooperation. The law exists only in the telling, passed from mouth to mouth around the fire, reinforced by glares and gossip and the stern judgment of the elder. It is a moral code written not on parchment, but in the air. It is enforced not by authority, but by consensus. This is the next layer of the human experiment. How do you build justice without a blueprint? How do you tame the selfish individual for the sake of the tribe, when the only club you have is the opinion of your peers? The gift in the grave suggests we cared for the dead, but the judgment around the fire would determine if we could live with each other. The humid air hangs thick and heavy, a living blanket of scent and sound. Somewhere in the dappled green twilight of a tropical forest, a small band of hunter-gatherers rests after a successful hunt. The air is rich with the smell of cooked meat and wood smoke. There is a law here, as old as the group itself, spoken not on parchment but carried in the collective memory. What is hunted is shared. It is the unbreakable covenant. Yet, on this evening, one man has broken it. Driven by a private hunger, a flicker of selfishness, he has hidden a portion of his kill. The transgression is discovered. The group knows. The following day, no hand is raised against him. There is no violent reprisal, no shouted accusation. Instead, he is met with a wall of silence. No one meets his eye, no one offers him a tool, no one speaks his name. He is, for all intents and purposes, invisible. The punishment is not delivered with a club, but with a void. It is a social death, far more profound and terrifying than any physical blow. This silent sanction is not a human invention, but an ancient inheritance. We observe it in the troops of baboons and the communities of chimpanzees, our primate cousins. A member who breaches the social code, by stealing food, by attacking an infant, might find themselves suddenly alone. Grooming rituals cease. Playful invitations stop. The offender is shunned. This is punishment by ostracism, a strategy of breathtaking efficiency. It requires no expenditure of precious energy on a fight, no risk of injury to the enforcers. It simply withdraws the one thing every social creature needs: connection. Neuroscientists have mapped the brain's response to this exclusion, and the findings are startling. The same neural pathways that light up in response to physical pain, the sharp sting of a wound, the deep ache of a break, flare into life when we experience social rejection. This suggests that the dread of isolation is not some sophisticated cultural fear. It is a primal, biological alarm bell. It is an ancient neurological mechanism, hardwired by evolution, that makes the prospect of being cast out from the group feel like a threat to survival itself. For a social animal, to be alone is to be prey. Could it be, then, that the very foundation of what we call morality is, in its rawest form, simply this deep-seated, coercive imperative to belong? Is our first ethical system merely enforced conformity, a rule of conduct written not in virtue, but in the cold calculus of survival? Long before the first city walls were raised, before the first codes of law were carved into stone, human societies maintained a delicate and complex order. In the vast stretches of our pre-agricultural past, there were no police, no courts, no prisons. The unit was the band, rarely exceeding 150 individuals, and its stability was everything. How did they curb the cheater, the bully, the free rider? The evidence suggests they used tools far subtler than force. They wielded reputation. In a world where every life was public and interconnected, a person's standing was their most valuable currency. Gossip was not idle chatter. It was the central nervous system of the group, a rapid and efficient way to disseminate news of who could be trusted and who could not. And the ultimate sanction was not banishment into the wilderness, which was a death sentence, but this same soft, devastating punishment, ostracism. The law was enforced not by the edge of a blade, but by averted gazes and deliberate silence. It was a system of justice written in the language of relationship, a constant low-grade pressure that molded behavior to fit the common good. The rules of the tribe were kept alive in the space between words, in the weight of a collective glance. The community itself was the judge and the jury, and its sentence was to make a person disappear while still standing in plain sight. We like to think of ourselves as vastly more sophisticated than our ancient ancestors, insulated by our institutions and our technology. Yet the same primal engine of social control hums powerfully within the heart of our modern world. We have digitized the campfire. Cancel culture, public shaming, collective silence. These are merely the contemporary manifestations of that old, deep-seated impulse. When a public figure transgresses a prevailing social norm, the response is often not a legal suit but a social one, a withdrawal of platforms, a chorus of condemnation, a refusal to engage. We unfriend, we block, we mute. Our brain scans would likely show the same ancient pain centers activating in the shamed individual today as they did in that shunned hunter millennia ago. This forces an uncomfortable question upon us. Is our modern sense of right and wrong still fundamentally rooted in this fear? Do we toe the line because we genuinely believe in the principle, or because we are terrified of the psychic pain, the professional ruin, the social death that comes from being pushed to the margins? Is the fear of being wrong ultimately just a polished version of the fear of being alone? This, then, presents us with a profound and unsettling paradox. If our moral behavior is primarily a mechanism for group acceptance, a strategy to avoid the neural firestorm of ostracism, then what does that make morality itself? Is it a genuine internal compass pointing toward some abstract notion of the good? Or is it merely a sophisticated costume for fear? Are we truly ethical beings, or are we just excellent, calculating social actors, performing virtue to maintain our standing in the tribe? The man who shares his meat because he feels it is right, and the man who shares it because he is terrified of the silence. Their actions are identical. Their inner worlds could not be more different. Which one possesses real morality? Can an action forced by the threat of pain, even social pain, ever be considered truly moral? Or is the very act of choosing to conform, despite our selfish instincts, the first and most fundamental ethical choice we ever make? Perhaps the most enduring truth about morality is that it is a creature of community. It does not need written language to exist. Its first texts were the faces of those around us. It is woven into the very fabric of human connection, a shared project that begins the moment we start to care what others think. But this realization leads us to a quieter, more intimate threshold. If our ethics are born from the gaze of the other, then perhaps they do not start with a grand philosophical declaration. Perhaps they begin in a much smaller, simpler, more physical act of care. Not with a rule, but with a touch. Long before that hunter was silenced by his tribe, in a time even more remote, another human story was unfolding. Archaeologists have unearthed skulls from our deep past, tens of thousands of years old, that tell a different kind of tale. In the jaw of one such individual, a molar reveals a precise, deliberate hole, drilled into the aching pulp of a rotten tooth. It is an ancient dental filling. The act is one of astounding technical skill and empathy. Was this procedure done merely to stop the agony? Or was it because someone, looking at another's suffering, could not bear to do nothing? Was it the first draft of a different kind of law, written not in fear of exclusion, but in the courage of connection? The silent treatment enforces the rules of the group, but the careful hand that holds the drill and heals the wound. What does that enforce? The discovery was a whisper from the depths of time, a quiet anomaly in a 13,000-year-old skull. There, on a worn molar, was a small, precise hole. Not the work of decay or the mark of a hard seed, but a deliberate, drilled cavity. And within it, a filling, a plug of bitumen, a primitive tar. This was dentistry in its most nascent form. But the true shock, the detail that made archaeologists pause, wasn't the act itself. It was the geometry of the procedure. The angle of the bore was all wrong. This individual could not have performed this delicate, painful operation on themselves. Someone else had done it. Someone had leaned in, with a sharp tool and a steady hand, and offered relief. The question hangs in the air, a bridge across millennia. Why? Why would one prehistoric human go through such trouble to ease the suffering of another? Pain is a primal signal, a biological alarm that screams through the nervous system with an urgency that bypasses all other thought. It is a deeply selfish sensation, a command to focus solely on the self and the source of the injury. Yet its echo creates something profoundly selfless. When we witness pain in another, a mirror flickers to life within our own brains. Specialized neurons, those we share with many social creatures, fire not because we are hurt, but because we see hurt. This neural echo is the bedrock of empathy. It is an evolutionary adaptation, a hardwired connection that transforms a personal distress signal into a social one. The grimace, the gasp, the guarded posture, these are a universal language that predates speech. They scream, "I am vulnerable." And in a world of constant threat, that vulnerability could be a death sentence for the individual and a weakness for the group. So, the brain of the observer responds. Stress hormones spike, not just from fear, but from a compelled urge to act, to stop the signal, to soothe, to help. This instinct is the biological cradle of compassion, the raw, unthinking precursor to what we would later call mercy. It is less about a grand moral choice and more about a fundamental need to restore equilibrium, to quiet the alarm that rings in both the wounded body and the witnessing mind. Was the person who drilled that ancient tooth simply answering this deep biological call to silence a disruptive cry? This tiny dental filling, then, is far more than a technical marvel. It is a fossilized act of care, a concrete manifestation of an abstract bond. It speaks of a society where the value of an individual was measured not solely in their strength as a hunter or their fertility, but in their mere existence as part of a whole. The procedure required knowledge, an understanding of cause and effect, that drilling could remove decay, and that a sealant could protect. It required foresight, the planning to procure the right tool and the right material. But most importantly, it required cooperation. It required a moment where one person's suffering became a problem for another to solve. This is a primitive medical ethic, not born of Hippocratic oaths or modern ideals of charity, but of pure, pragmatic interdependence. In a world where every hand was needed and every life was a thread in the communal fabric, survival was a collective project. Letting a member succumb to a tooth infection, an ailment that could lead to incapacitating pain, abscess, and death, was a loss to the entire group. Keeping them alive, functional, and fed was a net gain. So, was this act of dentistry a calculation? An early investment in social capital? The morality here is not the glittering ideal we know today, but something earthier, tougher, and perhaps more honest. It was the morality of the hive, the pack, the clan, a morality built on the unspoken rule that what strengthens one of us strengthens all of us. We live in the world this impulse built. Our modern medical institutions, with their gleaming technology and lofty ethical codes, are the magnified descendants of that first dental procedure. We have codified care, professionalized compassion, and enshrined the principle of do no harm as a societal pillar. Medicine is now one of our greatest symbols of human virtue, a testament to our collective will to alleviate suffering. We see it as a pure good, a triumph of empathy over indifference. But looking back at that ancient, filled tooth, we are offered a humbler, more visceral origin story. It suggests that long before medicine was a symbol of morality, morality itself was a practical tool for survival. The first stirrings of ethical duty may not have been a philosophical concept, but a physical response, a wince, a shared grimace, a hand reaching out. The impulse to heal, it seems, might be older than the idea of good and evil. It is woven into the very fabric of our biology, a response to the most fundamental human experience, the stark, undeniable reality of another's pain. Does this mean our grandest institutions of care are ultimately just sophisticated extensions of a primal urge to maintain group cohesion? Yet we must be cautious not to romanticize the past. The shadow of that first healer also casts a doubt. Was it truly compassion that guided the hand that held the drill, or was it a colder, more pragmatic calculus? In a harsh prehistoric world, resources were scarce and energy was precious. Spending time and effort on a dental procedure for another could simply be the most efficient way to maintain a valuable asset. A skilled flint knapper with a toothache is a less productive flint knapper. A hunter in throbbing pain is a less effective hunter. The act of care, in this light, becomes a form of investment, a maintenance of social capital for the benefit of the collective. The recipient of the care is not seen as a subject of moral worth, but as an object of utility. The empathy we project onto the healer might be an illusion, a modern sentiment overlaying an ancient reality of pure survival logic. The filling in the tooth is undeniable evidence of care, but the motive for that care remains buried forever. Can we ever truly separate the impulse to help from the expectation of a return, however indirect? Is even our most celebrated compassion secretly tied to a selfish gene? So we are left with this ancient paradox, a single tooth that contains a universe of questions about who we are. It suggests our morality is not a divine revelation or a purely intellectual construct, but something that grew from the ground of our biology, watered by the stark necessities of survival. It began with a shared flinch, a mirrored pain, and the simple, profound act of one person trying to stop the hurt of another. But if this is how ethics began, not in grand pronouncements, but in these small, gritty acts of mutual aid, then how did it grow? How did it evolve from a reaction to immediate pain into a complex system of stories, rules, and shared beliefs? The answer, perhaps, flickers in the darkness, just beyond the light of that first dental drill. It crackles and dances in a place of gathering, of shared warmth and shared shadows. It begins with the first time our ancestors huddled not just for safety, but for something more. It begins with the first story told not just to explain, but to bind. Can a shared flame be the forge where a shared conscience is hammered into shape? Imagine the night, deep and absolute, a velvet darkness pressing in from all sides. The air holds a chill that seeps into the bones, and the sounds of the unknown rustle just beyond sight. Then, a point of light. A flicker, then a steady glow. Figures gather, drawn to the warmth, their faces illuminated in the dancing orange light. This is not merely a source of heat, it is an island of consciousness in a sea of instinct. Here, for the first time, our ancestors did not just huddle for survival. They sat. They spoke. They began to weave the world's first narratives from the raw threads of the day's hunt, a near escape, a strange sighting. In this primal theater of shadow and flame, where stories were told and judgments whispered, did we first discover not just who we were, but who we should be? Did morality itself crackle to life in that ancient fire? The transformation was biological, etched into our very DNA by the consistent presence of the flame. Before fire, the setting sun was a command, a signal to retreat to the safety of a tree or a shallow cave, where the darkness was a time of vulnerability and rest. Fire changed the equation. It pushed back the night, literally and figuratively, gifting our ancestors with precious hours of wakefulness once claimed by sleep. This was stolen time, and within it, a new space emerged. No longer were evenings solely for recuperation. They became for conversation. The simple, functional grunts of the day, warnings about predators, calls to coordinate a hunt, began to evolve in this new, relaxed arena. They stretched into descriptions, into recollections. The brain, this hungry organ, now had a new workout. It began to fire in novel patterns, connecting events with emotions, actions with consequences. It started to craft neural pathways tuned not just to the factual. The lion was there, but to the interpretive. Why was the lion there? Was it my fault? Was it his? Around the fire, the human mind practiced the delicate art of narrative, and in doing so, it began to build the scaffolding for a shared code. A story about a hunter who stole another's kill wasn't just gossip. It was a data point in a slowly coalescing cloud of right and wrong. The warmth of the fire did more than heat the body. It incubated the conscience. Could our deepest sense of ethics be, at its core, a neurological response to a good story told under the stars? The archaeological record offers a silent, stunning testimony to this social revolution. Evidence of controlled fire dates back 1,000,000 years or more to Homo erectus. They had the flame, but did they have the forum? The critical shift appears with us, Homo sapiens. At sites like the Clayzees River Caves in South Africa, the story is told not in artifacts alone, but in the empty space between them. The hearth is the centerpiece, but around it, the debris tells a tale of social architecture. The remains of larger, older animals are found in one area, suggesting a place where the elders gathered, perhaps receiving the choicest cuts. In another, finer tools and evidence of craft. Here, the young might have listened and learned. There, the butchered bones of a meal, carefully divided. This isn't a random scatter of a group that ate and slept. This is a deliberate organization of space, a physical manifestation of a social contract. Archaeologists like to call these sites the first living rooms, but perhaps they were something even more profound. The first parliaments, the first courtrooms. Around these fires, the first we was defined. Rules were negotiated, not written. Traditions were passed down, not through genes, but through words and witnessed example. The circle of light defined the circle of the tribe, and within that circle, the first constitution, unspoken but deeply understood, was forged. What is law, if not the fossilized remnant of a story everyone around the fire agreed to believe? This ancient blueprint still dictates the architecture of our modern souls. We may have traded animal hides for suits and the open savanna for glass and steel towers, but the impulse remains unchanged. Where do we go to debate, to judge, to connect? The modern courtroom, with its solemn rituals and seeking of truth, is a formalized fire circle, the judge's bench its hearth. The parliament, where representatives fiercely argue the rules for the tribe, is a vast, complex network of many fires burning as one. And what is a cafe, a pub, a dinner party, if not a gentle echo of that primal scene? We still lean in, our faces soft in the light of a candle or a screen, and we share our stories. We gossip, which is the modern equivalent of updating the tribal database on trust and betrayal. We seek counsel and offer forgiveness. We build our bonds and reinforce our norms not in the bright transactional light of day, but in the softer, more intimate space we consciously create. This suggests a startling possibility that our moral compass was not first calibrated by philosophers in libraries, but by storytellers in the flickering dark. Is our thirst for justice simply a lifelong yearning to return to that circle of warmth and shared understanding? Yet, the fire's light casts long and twisting shadows. The very same space that nurtured empathy and rules could also incubate their dark twins: fear, suspicion, and hatred. The fire circle did not just unite the tribe, it implicitly defined everyone outside of it as other. The stories told were not always parables of cooperation. They could be epic tales of conflict, of the cunning enemy who lurked beyond the light. It was around the fire that elders might have taught the children how to identify the rival clan, to distrust their ways, to see them as less than human. The same narrative power that could foster compassion could be weaponized to justify cruelty. The fire provided the safety to care for your own, and the terrifying clarity to dehumanize the rest. So, was the fire itself the creator of morality, or was it merely a potent tool, a blank slate upon which we projected our best and worst instincts? An amplifier that could broadcast both a hymn of peace and a call to war? Does the source of our humanity also contain the blueprint for our inhumanity? This duality forces a deeper, more uncomfortable question. If morality was born from the consensus of the circle, then its authority is vested in the group. But what happens when the group's judgment turns dark? Imagine a scene from that deep past. The story has been told. The evidence, such as it is, has been laid out. A consensus forms around the fire. The stranger in their midst, or even the once trusted member, is deemed a threat, a bearer of evil spirits, a thief, a danger to all. The group, united in its purpose, makes a decision. They act to eliminate the threat. In that moment, are they committing an act of brutal, organized violence, or are they performing what they sincerely believe to be their highest moral duty, protecting the collective? They are following the rules their stories have created. They are upholding their code. So, which is it when the circle condemns a man, the birth of justice, or simply murder with a quorum? Is the only difference between a sacred act and a savage one the number of people who agree with it? The man is a poison. He takes the food from the mouths of the children, his fists are quick to strike the weaker ones, and in the dark he smashed the best flint tool we had. For weeks a silent dread has coiled around the fire, a shared understanding that something vital is rotting within the heart of our small group. Survival is a fragile thread here, at the mercy of the cold and the beasts. One thread snaps, and the whole weave may unravel. The decision, when it comes, is not spoken in anger, but in a grim, collective whisper. We must remove him. It is a terrible calculus, a weighing of one life against the stability of the many. Was this same dark equation solved in the deep caves and misty valleys of the ancient world? Did a Neanderthal, gripping a heavy stone, face the same churning in his gut, the same silent accusation from the stars above? To kill a bad person, is it right? This impulse to punish, to remove the threat, is not a uniquely human invention. It is etched deep into the ledger of life itself. In a troop of chimpanzees, a dominant male will violently discipline a younger one for a transgression, restoring order through a display of power. A wolf that consistently steals food may find itself ostracized, forced to the lonely periphery of the pack where survival is slim. This is social hygiene, a brutal but effective mechanism for group survival. From an evolutionary standpoint, a community that tolerates a relentless freeloader or a violent predator within its own ranks is a community flirting with extinction. The genes that predispose us to cooperation, to reciprocity, and yes, to a willingness to confront and neutralize cheaters are the very genes that allowed our ancestors to thrive. It is a biological imperative, a whisper from our blood that says the many must be protected from the one. Yet this same instinct, this ancient tool for cohesion, carries a terrifying shadow. For who gets to define the bad one? Is the line between protector and tyrant, between justice and the brutal elimination of a rival, any thicker than a hair? The club that defends the cradle can, in the next moment, become the instrument of a terrible mistake. The silent stones and buried bones of prehistory hold their secrets close, offering no easy verdict. There is no carved tablet from the Paleolithic that lays out a legal code for execution. But the earth has yielded clues, fragments of a darker story. Archaeologists have unearthed skeletons, not from battlefields, but from quiet graves that tell a tale of cold deliberation. A Neanderthal skull from Shanidar Cave shows a devastating blow to the head, likely from a close-range strike with a heavy object, an injury inconsistent with a hunt or a clash with a beast. Another body, a young man from the Neolithic, was found with his hands and feet bound, a sharp flint point embedded in his vertebrae. These are not injuries of passion from a sudden fight. They are the methodical, final acts of a community. They speak of a council, a decision made around a fire, a sentence carried out. It suggests that long before written laws, we understood the concept of a terminal solution to a social problem. The evidence implies that we have, for millennia, wrestled with the concept of the greater good, and found that sometimes it must be purchased with a specific, terrible price. But does the mere ability to do such a thing mean it was right, or merely that it was possible? This ancient dilemma did not vanish with the advent of civilization. We merely built structures around it, institutions to hold the club and dictate its swing. Our modern world, for all its laws and ethics, still sanctifies killing under certain conditions. The soldier on the battlefield is lauded. The state that executes a murderer operates within the law, and the individual who kills in clear self-defense is rarely condemned. We have legal and moral frameworks that justify the taking of a life, always, we assure ourselves, for a higher purpose: justice, security, order. We dress the act in ceremony and procedure, believing this separates it from the raw violence of the past. Yet the essential question remains unchanged. When a society executes a criminal, is it an act of righteous justice, or merely a sophisticated, state-sanctioned version of that ancient, grim decision around the fire? The line between collective justice and collective vengeance is often blurred, a foggy borderland where our highest ideals meet our most primal fears. Does the gavel of a judge and the coldness of a lethal injection chamber truly purify the act? Or do they simply distance us from the visceral reality of what we are ultimately agreeing to do? Yet, for every argument that leans on the cold logic of survival, a quieter, more profound counterargument emerges from the depths of the human spirit. What if the true foundation of a strong society is not the ruthless elimination of the wrongdoer, but the miraculous illogical capacity for forgiveness? To kill the troublesome individual may solve an immediate problem, but it can shatter the very thing it seeks to protect: trust. It teaches that violence is the ultimate solution. It seeds the ground with fear and the potential for cyclical revenge. The act of removal, however justified, leaves a scar on the collective soul. Perhaps the real evolutionary advantage, the truly revolutionary trait that allowed humanity to build something more than just a surviving pack, was empathy. The ability to see the brokenness in another, to understand the circumstances that forged a monster, and to offer a chance at redemption, however difficult and dangerous, might be a greater sign of strength than the club itself. Does true security come from the absence of a threat, or from the presence of a binding, resilient compassion that can somehow absorb and heal that threat? If this is so, if the pinnacle of our morality lies not in exclusion but in embrace, not in ending a life but in valuing it despite its flaws, then how far back does this compassion truly go? Did it begin when we first learned to care for our sick and our elderly, extending survival beyond utility? Or did it perhaps spark into being even earlier, in a gesture so tender it defies the harshness of the ancient world? A small bundle, carefully placed in a shallow grave. Not a hunter, not a warrior, but the tiny curled form of a fetus, its bones not yet fully formed, laid to rest alongside an adult woman. This is what archaeologists found at a site in Austria, a silent testament from the Upper Paleolithic. Was it a mother's immeasurable grief, A private ritual of love for a child she never got to hold? Or was it something more? A glimmer of recognition from the entire group that this potential, this almost person, was worthy of respect, of a ceremony, of a place in the memory of the earth. This single poignant discovery casts a soft, complicating light on everything we think we know about the origins of our ethics. It suggests a capacity for love and loss that transcends pure survival logic. In the same hearts that may have decided to remove a threat beat the potential for this profound, illogical tenderness. So which gesture truly defines us? The hand that wields the club, or the hand that gently places a flower on a grave too small to comprehend? And if we were capable of such grief for a life that never was, what does that say about our responsibility to every life that is? In a quiet field, under the European sun, the earth gave up a secret it had held for millennia. Archaeologists carefully brushed away the dust of ages to reveal not one, but two skeletons. One was a woman, her bones telling a story of a life lived. The other, cradled within the arc of her ribs, was infinitely smaller, the delicate, almost ghostly frame of a 7-month-old fetus. This was not a discard. This was not neglect. This was a burial, a deliberate, careful act of laying someone to rest. The grave was a stone cradle. Why? Why would a community, ancient and preoccupied with sheer survival, perform this ritual for a life that had never drawn breath? The answer might begin not in the soil, but in the very chemistry of our bodies. The bond between a mother and her child is one of the deepest, most primal forces in the animal kingdom. It is a silent conversation conducted in hormones and neural pathways. Oxytocin, the molecule of connection, floods the system during birth and nursing, weaving an invisible thread between two beings. It activates ancient regions of the brain associated with attachment, with nurturing, with a love that is less an emotion and more a biological imperative. This is the cradle of our species. When that thread is severed, when a potential life is lost, the biological response is not a simple off switch. It is a seismic event. The body, prepared for a new presence, registers a profound absence. This pain is not abstract. It leaves a biological signature, a deep, aching wound that demands acknowledgement. Could this innate, physiological grief be the first and most private form of memorial? A silent, internal threnody that, when given a chance, must manifest in the external world? To bury the unborn is perhaps to make tangible this internal storm, to give shape to a sorrow that the body already knows. This private grief, made public in the act of burial, becomes a window into the mind of an entire community. The careful placement of the fetal bones within that ancient grave speaks a silent, powerful language. It tells us they did not see this as mere biological matter, a failed pregnancy. They saw a person who had not lived. In that distinction lies a seismic shift in consciousness. This is perhaps one of the very first stirrings of an idea we now wrestle with constantly, the inherent value of a life, irrespective of its stage or utility. It is an ethics that extends beyond the individual, beyond the strong, beyond the productive member of the tribe. It is the mourning of a future that will never unfold, the poignant acknowledgement of a story missing its middle and end. It is compassion reaching back into the darkness before birth. What does it say about us that our earliest moral gestures were not about power, but about care for the most vulnerable and the unrealized? And so we arrive at our present, carrying this ancient question into brightly lit hospitals and courtrooms and legislative halls. Our modern debates rage around the same core, the moral status of the unborn. Is it a person, a potential person, a part of the mother's body? The language is more complex, layered with legal terms and scientific facts about viability and neural development. But the essential, aching question remains unchanged from the one whispered over that stone cradle grave. When does a human become a human? The answer is never just biological. It is a philosophical mirror we hold up to ourselves. Our definition of personhood is the bedrock of our ethics, and it dictates who we protect, who we mourn, and who we value. Is our humanity bestowed at conception, at birth, or at some nebulous point in between when consciousness flickers to life? And if we cannot agree on the map, how can we possibly draw the borders? Yet the story is never that simple. For every grave that speaks of care, history provides a counter-narrative that chills the blood. Many cultures across time and space have not afforded newborns the full status of personhood. The practice of exposure, leaving an unwanted or infirm infant to the elements, was a documented and, in some contexts, a socially accepted reality. In times of extreme scarcity or concerning a child that seemed unlikely to survive, the hard calculus of survival could override the soft impulse of care. This is the uncomfortable, shadowed counterpart to our tender narrative. It forces us to ask, is love truly innate, or is it a luxury granted by stability? Is our compassion a deep, unwavering current, or is it a tide that ebbs and flows with the harsh realities of survival? Does this mean the mother's love is conditional, or that the community's ethics are? So where does this leave us, suspended between a Stone Age grave and a modern dilemma? Perhaps morality does not arrive fully formed from a divine source or from pure reason. Perhaps it is not something we created, but something we cultivated. It might have begun in the raw, biological ache of loss, in the instinct to care for the weak, in the shared pain that binds a group together, in the need to enforce rules for collective survival, and in the stories we told around fires to make sense of it all. It is a complex tapestry woven from threads of instinct, emotion, social necessity, and profound pity. We did not invent the thread. We found it within ourselves, a part of our evolutionary inheritance, and we began to weave. We learned to feel another's potential future as a tangible thing, worthy of grief. We learned to see a person in the unseen. And if our morality is indeed born from this messy, beautiful, and often contradictory blend of instinct and community, then its next evolutionary step might be found in a uniquely human trait, one that separates us from all other primates, a trait that paints our cheeks with a visible, burning signal of our own failure. A person misspeaks in a meeting, and a deep, unmistakable flush creeps up their neck and across their cheeks. A child drops a bowl of rice, and their small face immediately ducks, eyes fixed on the floor. No one has raised a hand. No one has shouted a reprimand. Yet they are ashamed. This reaction is so universal, so deeply ingrained, it feels almost instinctual. What is this peculiar mechanism within us that triggers a visceral, physical response to a mere misstep? Why do we, alone among the earth's creatures, redden and retreat not from a physical blow, but from the invisible sting of social error? It is a silent language written in blood and biology, a story of survival etched into our very skin. Biologically, shame is a full-body event, a sophisticated and ancient signal system. It begins not in the conscious mind, but in the primal, reactive depths of the nervous system. The rush of blood to the face, the averted gaze, the slumping of the shoulders, these are not voluntary acts of contrition. They are an evolutionary script, a performance of submission written over millennia. In the harsh arithmetic of early human survival, group membership was everything. To be ostracized was a death sentence. An act of aggression, of selfishness, or of incompetence risked provoking retaliatory violence from the group. The blush, then, is a nonverbal white flag. It is a biological apology, an instantaneous broadcast that says, I recognize my error. I lower my status. Do not cast me out. It disarms the anger of others by demonstrating immediate and utter capitulation. No other primate blushes. The physiological capacity is uniquely human. This crimson tide is a landmark of our species, a testament to the fact that our most powerful survival tool was not the club, but the community. The body, in its profound wisdom, developed a way to plead for re-entry before the sentence of exile could even be passed. Could it be that our deepest social glue is not pride, but this very capacity for humble, crimson-faced surrender? If biology provided the signal, then culture and community provided the stage and the script upon which shame would perform its intricate dance. Long before written legal codes, societies were governed by a complex web of unwritten rules, and the enforcement of these rules often took a form that was psychological rather than physical. Archaeological hints and early historical records suggest a deep understanding of shame's power. Consider the practices of ancient tribes. A chief might receive a specific tattoo not of honor, but of a transgression, a permanent mark of a past failure worn on the skin for all to see. Other cultures practice the shaving of a wrongdoer's head, stripping them not of health or limb, but of dignity and social identity. These were not acts of mere cruelty. They were calculated tools of social regulation. They were a way for the community to sculpt behavior by making internal failure externally visible. The punishment was not the pain of the needle or the shears, but the relentless, silent judgment that followed. It was the avoidance of one's gaze in the communal firelight, the subtle shift in seating arrangements, the hushed conversations that stopped upon approach. This was the invention of the invisible cage. Shame became the most efficient jailer, one that required no walls and no guards, because the prisoner willingly carried the lock and key within their own mind. The community had discovered it could wield conformity not with a fist, but with a frown. In our modern, complex world, this ancient mechanism has been internalized and refined into a precise instrument of self-governance. Today, shame rarely requires an audience with tattoos and shears. It has moved indoors, taking up residence in the private theater of our consciousness. Modern psychology frames this as the development of a conscience, the internalization of social norms. We now carry the entire community inside our heads. The feeling of shame is the activation of this internal jury. It is the swift, private verdict we deliver upon ourselves when we breach a code, whether it's a moral failing, a social gaffe, or a professional oversight. We are the accused, the judge, and the witness all at once. We punish ourselves with the heat in our cheeks and the knot in our stomach long before anyone else can. This is the ultimate social tool, a population that polices itself. The blush is the physical evidence of this internal trial, a fleeting but powerful testament to the fact that we are, at our core, social animals who have learned to fear our own judgment most of all. We have become so adept at this self-regulation that the mere potential of external shame, the thought of someone discovering our error, is often enough to trigger the full physiological response. The community's frown has been so perfectly mimicked by our own psyche that we no longer need the community to be physically present to feel its weight. Yet for all its evolutionary utility and social necessity, this powerful force has a dark and corrosive twin. The same mechanism that fosters harmony can be weaponized to break a spirit. Shame is not always the gentle guide back to the fold. It can be the hammer that shatters the individual on the altar of the group. When deployed not to correct a behavior, but to assert dominance, to suppress dissent, or to enforce conformity to arbitrary or cruel standards, shame becomes a tool of oppression. It is the difference between the blush that follows a recognized mistake and the perpetual sinking feeling of being fundamentally flawed, inadequate, or unworthy. This is the shame used by tyrants, by bullies, and by toxic institutions. It is the shame that does not say, "What you did was wrong," but instead whispers, "You are wrong." This perversion strips away the restorative purpose of shame and leaves only the destructive self-loathing. It isolates rather than reintegrates. So, we are left with a paradoxical question. Can a feeling so central to our moral compass also be the very thing that dismantles it? If shame is the foundation of our social contract, is it any wonder that the most brutal breaches of that contract are so often accomplished by exploiting it? This leaves us at a precipice, looking back across the vast expanse of human development. If shame is indeed a wordless punishment, a biological and social technology for maintaining order without violence, then how far back does its lineage truly stretch? The fossil record offers no preserved blushes, no fossilized feelings of regret. but we can imagine a scene 2 million years ago. A member of a Homo erectus band, driven by hunger, takes more than their share from a communal hunt. They are not struck. They are not banished. But the next day, the grooming stops. The shared glances bypass them. The low, comforting hum of conversation quietens when they approach. The punishment is not physical, but social, a withdrawal of the connection that means life itself. The lesson is learned not through pain, but through profound isolation. Did they feel it? That primal ache, the precursor to the heat we now feel? Did they, in some deep, unarticulated way, know shame? If so, then perhaps the first law was never carved in stone, but felt in the blood. It suggests a profound and unsettling truth, that long before we built courthouses and wrote constitutions, we carried the law within us, enforced by the silent, relentless jury of our peers and the echoing chamber of our own minds. And if that is the case, what other invisible ancient laws are we still obeying, their origins lost to time, their commands written only in the flush of our skin and the quiet dread of being left alone? The air is thick with the scent of wet earth and decay, a heavy blanket of humidity that has not lifted for 1,000,000 years. The chorus of the jungle is a constant, layered symphony, the drone of insects, the distant call of a predator, the rustle of unseen creatures in the canopy. In a small clearing, a group of Homo erectus gathers around the remains of a scavenged kill. The fire, a recent and terrifying marvel, crackles at their center, its light dancing on faces heavy with brow and purpose. The meat is distributed, a ritual of shared survival. But one individual, a young male, acts on an impulse he does not understand as greed. He sees an unattended portion, and with a furtive glance, snatches it, consuming it quickly. He expects violence, a club to the skull, bared teeth, and guttural shouts. It is the law of the jungle, he knows. But it does not come. No one strikes him. No one even snarls. The group simply stills. The conversation of grunts and gestures dies. They finish their meal in a silence that is more terrifying than any noise. The next day, the group moves on. They do not exclude him physically. He may follow. But when food is found, no portion is offered to him. When a warning cry echoes through the trees, no one looks to ensure he heard it. His attempts to engage are met with averted eyes, a turning of backs, a void where social connection once was. He is surrounded by his kind, yet utterly alone. What law is being enforced here, so absolute in its power, though no chieftain decreed it and no judge pronounced sentence? This silent sentencing, this social excision, is not a human invention, but an ancient, hardwired strategy written into the very code of life. Ostracism is a primordial law, observed in creatures separated from us by eons of evolution. A monkey who repeatedly steals food will find itself grooming alone, its invitations to bond ignored. A bird that fails to heed the flock's alarm calls may find itself flying solo, a solitary and vulnerable target. This is not about petty revenge or simple dislike. It is a cold, calculated evolutionary calculus. The violator is not hated. They are deemed untrustworthy. Their actions have introduced a fatal variable into the equation of survival, a crack in the group's unified defense against a hostile world. To tolerate them is to risk everyone. The human mind, even in its earliest incarnations, developed a powerful reflex for this social distancing, a deep-seated neurological alarm that rings not at the sight of a predator, but at the scent of a betrayer. It is a mechanism that prioritizes the safety of the whole over the comfort of the one, a brutal but effective form of quality control. Is our profound fear of loneliness, then, merely an evolutionary artifact, a ghost in the machine ensuring we play by the rules? Long after our ancestors left the jungle for the savannah, and the savannah for the world, the silent law traveled with them. Before the invention of the prison, the court, or the standing army, ostracism remained the most powerful sanction available to a community. Archaeological whispers hint at this practice. In some ancient settlements, evidence points to the existence of designated badlands on the outskirts of habitation, places where those who had broken the tribe's sacred taboos were sent. There were no walls, no guards. Their punishment was not imprisonment or violence, but a simple, suffocating withdrawal of recognition. They were forced to live in the shadow of the community, to see the smoke from its fires and hear the sounds of its life, while being treated as if they were already ghosts. The message was clear: you exist, but you know not matter. You are no longer part of the we. This social death was often a more effective deterrent than a physical one. What does it say about us that the withdrawal of human connection can be a more devastating punishment than the infliction of physical pain? This ancient tool has not been retired. It has simply been refined, its edges honed for the modern world. We no longer banish people to literal wastelands, but we have perfected the art of creating psychological ones. The silent treatment in a marriage, the cold shoulder from a group of friends, the professional freeze-out in an office, the digital exile of cancel culture. These are all modern manifestations of the same primordial impulse. Neuroscience has mapped the aftermath of this silence, revealing that the pain of social rejection is not metaphorical. It fires up the same neural pathways as physical injury, a deep and visceral ache that tells us we are in danger because, for a social species, isolation is the ultimate danger. This ache is the engine of conformity, the invisible hand that guides us toward cooperative behavior. So are our modern societies, for all their complex laws and moral philosophies, ultimately held together not by a love of virtue, but by a deeply ingrained biological fear of being left behind. Is the true enforcer of morality simply the dread of that echoing silence? Yet, for all its evolutionary utility, this silent law carries a dark and dangerous shadow. The same tool that polices cooperation can also enforce conformity of the most stifling kind. It can become a weapon for the majority against the minority, a way to crush dissent, punish difference, and maintain oppressive norms without ever throwing a single punch. A community that relies too heavily on ostracism becomes a place of simmering anxiety and deep suspicion, where every glance is scrutinized and every misstep potentially catastrophic. The fear of being cast out can stifle innovation, silence crucial questions, and create a culture of rigid dogma. The very mechanism designed to preserve the group can, in the end, poison it from within, transforming a community of individuals into a hive of unquestioning obedience. This begs a difficult, almost paradoxical question. If ostracism is our natural, evolved tool for maintaining social order, do we not then have a responsibility to develop an unnatural counterweight, a form of humane punishment that acknowledges the immense psychic damage of exile and seeks to correct rather than simply to cast out? If the law can be unwritten, unspoken, and invisible, yet wield such immense power over our actions, then it forces us to reconsider the very nature of morality itself. We like to imagine our ethics as a set of internalized noble principles, a compass guided by reason and virtue. But what if that compass is ultimately calibrated by the gaze of others? What if our sense of right and wrong is less a divine spark and more a sophisticated internal map of social expectations, a calculated forecast of approval and isolation? We behave well because we are good, or because we are terrified of the quiet that follows when the tribe turns its back. The silent law of the jungle suggests that the foundation of morality may not be a grand philosophical truth discovered in solitude, but a deeply social contract, negotiated in the silent language of shared glances and communal silence. It exists not in scrolls or statutes, but in the space between us, in the intricate dance of connection and withdrawal. And if this is so, if our ethics are truly born from the fear of being alone, then what does that make virtue? Is it courage, or is it merely a calculation? And if this silent social pressure is the oldest teacher, how then do we first learn its language? Perhaps the answers are not found in the dense undergrowth of a prehistoric forest, but in the sun-drenched clearings of childhood, in the next layer of the story, where every culture in the world observes children playing a universal game. Let's pretend. A child in a sun-drenched yard in South Africa places a cool leaf on a friend's forehead, whispering reassurances in a game of doctor. In a tidy apartment in Tokyo, another carefully arranges dolls around a tiny table, orchestrating the silent drama of a family meal. And in a dusty field somewhere, a third playfully collapses, feigning death before erupting in giggles. This is the universal language of pretend play, a silent pact enacted by children across the globe. It requires no instruction manual, no common tongue. Why is this impulse to step into another skin, to be a healer, a provider, a corpse, so deeply and instinctively human? Is it merely a game, a frivolous pastime to pass the hours of childhood? Or is it perhaps our first and most fundamental moral rehearsal? At its heart, the act of pretending is a quiet miracle of cognitive architecture. It is the first, fragile evidence of a theory of mind stirring to life within us. This is not some dry academic concept, but a seismic shift in consciousness, the dawning realization that the universe is not a solo performance. The child playing doctor understands, in a way that is felt more than articulated, that the friend wincing in pain possesses an inner world separate from their own. That world contains feelings, thoughts, and experiences that are uniquely theirs. This is the bedrock of all moral reasoning. Before we can ever decide not to cause harm, we must first be able to imagine that harm can be felt. Before we can choose to offer comfort, we must conceive that comfort might be needed somewhere outside ourselves. The simple game of house or doctor is a training ground for empathy, a neural workshop where the raw materials of self and other are assembled into the foundation of good and bad. The child who pretends to be a nurturing parent is, in that moment, practicing the very essence of care. So, does our innate sense of morality begin not with a rule, but with a story we tell ourselves about someone else? The urge to pretend seems so spontaneous, so natural, that we might assume it leaves no fossil record. Yet, if we know where to look, the evidence is etched not in stone, but in clay. Scattered across archaeological sites from the Paleolithic onward are small, often overlooked figurines. A voluptuous Venus statue is often interpreted as a fertility goddess, an object of veneration for adults. But what of the cruder, simpler clay dolls found in the hearths of ancient settlements? These were not idols for worship. They were toys. A child, 30,000 years ago, cradled a roughly shaped figure of baked earth, assigning it a role, a name, a life. In doing so, they were not just passing time. They were rehearsing. They were practicing the intricate dance of social roles and responsibilities that they would one day have to perform in earnest. This play was a sacred, necessary mimicry, a way of trying on the future like a garment. It was how a young hunter might learn patience, or a future gatherer might learn the rhythms of provision and care. The games were a silent curriculum, teaching the protocols of the tribe and the unwritten codes of conduct that bound it together. Could it be that the first moral lessons were not preached from a pulpit, but whispered between children in the dirt? In our modern world, we have systematized this ancient impulse, harnessing the power of pretense for healing. Child psychologists now use role play as a core therapeutic tool. A child struggling with aggression might be guided to play the victim of their own actions. A child shrouded in silence might be given a puppet through which to finally speak. This is not mere distraction. It is a deliberate journey into the mind of another. It is empathy made actionable. Through the safe container of as if, children explore the consequences of actions, the textures of emotions, and the complex web of relationships that define a society. They learn that a single event can be experienced in a dozen different ways, depending on the eyes through which it is seen. This suggests something profound, that ethical behavior may be less about memorizing a list of commandments and more about the capacity for imaginative travel. Morality, then, might be rooted in the ability to temporarily vacate the fortress of the self and become, even for a moment, someone else. What if our highest moral achievements are born from our simplest acts of make-believe? Yet a shadow of a doubt persists. Could we be guilty of a beautiful anthropomorphism, of painting purpose onto what is merely a random spark of neural activity? Perhaps this play is nothing more than an evolutionary byproduct, a mental tick with no greater significance than the flightless wings of an ostrich. Maybe the child pretending to be a tiger is simply mimicking a sound, a movement, with no deeper understanding of the tiger's hunger or its place in the ecosystem. The imitation of a parent could be just that. Imitation. A parrot-like repetition devoid of emotional resonance or moral comprehension. If that is true, then we are weaving a grand narrative of ethics around a phenomenon that is, at its core, an empty echo. Are we, in our desire to find meaning, constructing a cathedral where there is only the random chirping of neurons? But if we entertain the possibility that morality does indeed begin with the fragile, essential ability to feel what another might feel, then the emergence of the first religious impulses opens up a new and dizzying horizon. For when a human first looked at a lifeless body, and not only wondered where the warmth had gone, but imagined that something, a spirit, a breath, an essence, had departed for another realm, something unprecedented occurred. This was the ultimate act of pretend play, scaled to a cosmic level. It was the projection of theory of mind onto the entire universe. If the wind could have intention, if a mountain could hold a grudge, if an ancestor could watch and judge, then every action suddenly mattered in a terrifying and magnificent new way. Ethics was no longer just a matter of interpersonal empathy. It became a contract with the invisible. The sense of good and bad was lifted from the earthly realm of consequences and handed over to the divine, becoming sacred law. The moral imagination, once confined to playing house, now dared to play God. And so we are left to wonder, did our first prayers begin as the extension of our first games? The wind whispers across the arid plains of southeastern Anatolia, carrying dust that has settled for 12 millennia. It is a harsh, ancient land. And here, on a hill known as Göbekli Tepe, the world's first known mystery stands in silent, staggering defiance. Massive T-shaped pillars of limestone are arranged in great stone circles, each monolith weighing tons, hauled and erected by a people who had not yet invented the wheel, who had not yet domesticated a single plant or animal. They were hunters and gatherers, living a nomadic life dictated by the seasons and the migratory patterns of prey. Yet, they chose to build this. Their hands carved into the cold stone a menagerie of the wild. Foxes, scorpions, vultures, and lions, frozen in a perpetual snarl. The air here, even now, feels heavy with purpose. This was not a settlement. There are no hearths for daily cooking, no signs of domestic life. This was a temple, a sanctuary conceived by minds without writing, without agriculture, without any of the things we assume are prerequisites for civilization. Why would they need a religion? What profound, urgent hunger of the spirit compelled them to this backbreaking collective act of devotion before they had even built their first permanent home? Perhaps the answer begins not in the soil of a distant hill, but in the wet gray matter inside our own skulls. We are born pattern seekers, storytellers by necessity. Our brains are exquisite engines for inference, constantly connecting dots, even when the dots are random. Is that a rustle in the grass just the wind, or is it a stalking predator? Assuming it's a predator and being wrong costs you a moment of fear. Assuming it's the wind and being wrong costs you your life. This evolutionary gamble, played out over millions of years, hardwired us for a specific kind of paranoia, a tendency to attribute agency and intention to the world around us. It is a small step from hearing a deliberate menace in the growl of a leopard to sensing a conscious presence in the rumble of thunder or a willful character in the unpredictable flood of a river. This hyperactive agency detection, as some cognitive scientists call it, is a glorious, accidental byproduct of our survival instinct. It is the seed from which an idea grows, that the forces of nature are not just forces, but beings, that the world is watched, and if it is watched, then our actions might be seen. The first notion of an all-seeing eye may not have been a theological abstraction, but a whisper from our own DNA, a deep-seated intuition that we are never truly alone. Is our capacity for faith, then, simply a misfiring of a primal alarm system, a ghost in the machine of our own minds? Yet, an idea alone does not build a Göbekli Tepe. An intuition does not coordinate hundreds of people to quarry, transport, and erect megaliths under a burning sun. This is where the story shifts from the biological to the social, from the individual mind to the collective. As human groups grew larger than tight-knit bands of kin, a new problem emerged: how to ensure cooperation and prevent cheating amongst strangers. The watchful eyes of your immediate family could enforce good behavior, but what about when no one was looking? The ingenious, perhaps inevitable solution was to internalize that watchfulness. What if the eyes that watched were not human at all, but divine? The archaeological record suggests that these early religions were not merely a collection of beliefs, but a sophisticated social technology. The concept of a god or gods who could see every action, who rewarded cooperation and punished selfishness, became a powerful mechanism for enforcing pro-social behavior. It was the birth of a supernatural surveillance system, far more effective than any chieftain's authority. Morality, in this light, may have begun its journey when the eyes of the tribe were replaced by the eyes of the gods. It was a psychological revolution that allowed trust to extend beyond the familiar face, enabling the kind of large-scale collaboration that would eventually build cities and nations. Was religion, then, the original social contract, written not on paper, but in the human soul? This idea seems to resonate through the millennia, finding echoes in the very bedrock of our modern societies. Today, the foundational codes of conduct that hold our communities together, the prohibitions against murder and theft, the exhortations to honor parents, to care for the poor, to be truthful, are often enshrined in religious texts and traditions. They are presented not as man-made laws, but as divine decrees. If the seeds of these same norms existed in the pre-dawn of civilization, as the rituals at Göbekli Tepe might suggest, then perhaps religion was not the origin of morality, but its great accelerator. It provided a compelling, unforgettable narrative framework for ethical behavior, wrapping hard social necessities in the powerful cloak of sacred story and eternal consequence. It offered a reason to be good that was bigger than any individual, a purpose that transcended the immediate and the mortal. Did this celestial scaffolding allow humanity to build taller, more stable ethical structures than we could have ever managed on our own? But the story, like any good mystery, holds a counterplot. For we now live in an age where vast, complex, and remarkably cohesive societies thrive under explicitly secular frameworks. Atheists and agnostics do not, as a rule, descend into moral chaos. They build lives rich with empathy, integrity, and a deep sense of ethical commitment. Their morality appears to be sourced from other wells, from reason, from compassion, from a shared sense of humanity. This presents a quiet but formidable challenge to the narrative of divinely ordained virtue. It suggests that the moral law might be written somewhere else, perhaps in the very nature of social beings themselves. If deeply moral communities can exist without a belief in a watchful God, then does morality truly depend on the divine? Or did we simply use the divine as a powerful, persuasive tool to describe a truth we were already beginning to feel? This leaves us at a precipice, looking out over a landscape of questions. If religion was, at least in part, a tool, a magnificent, complex, cultural tool for reinforcing the bonds of morality and community, then what are we to make of the raw material it was shaping? What is the core of that morality itself if we strip away the sacred stories and the threat of supernatural judgment? The answer might be surprisingly, profoundly simple. It might be something we have carried with us all along, something far more ancient than any temple. It might be found not in the heavens, but in a glance, a shared moment of understanding, a silent exchange between two people. It might be rooted in the most fundamental tool of social connection we possess, perhaps the true cradle of conscience, the original mirror of the soul, is nothing more and nothing less than the human eye. You look into the mirror and meet a familiar gaze. The dark centers, the irises, float within a sea of brilliant white. It seems unremarkable, this design. But now, consider the eyes of a chimpanzee, our closest genetic relative. You'll see deep dark pools, the sclera nearly invisible. A wolf's piercing yellow stare offers no clue to its focus. For most of the animal kingdom, the direction of a gaze is a secret closely guarded. So why did evolution, that meticulous and pragmatic sculptor, decide that humans should wear their attention so openly on their sleeves? Why would we broadcast our every glance, our every flicker of interest or fear, to the world? This seemingly small anatomical quirk, the visible white of our eyes, might just be one of the most profound and overlooked keys to understanding not just how we see, but who we are. Beneath the surface of this simple question lies a deep biological blueprint. The hypothesis is as elegant as it is radical. We evolved this conspicuous sclera not as a flaw, but as a feature. In the intricate dance of early human survival, where cooperation was not a virtue but a necessity, the ability to silently coordinate was paramount. Imagine a group of hunters on the ancient savanna. A gesture could startle prey. A word could carry too far. But a shared glance? A quick, silent flick of the eyes toward a grazing animal, a potential threat lurking in the tall grass, or a ripe fruit hanging just out of reach. This was a language before language. The white sclera acted as a high-contrast pointer, a biological cursor illuminating the intent of its user. It turned the gaze into a tool of shared attention. But this tool came with a fascinating and perhaps unintended consequence. If your gaze is easily read, then your deceptions are easily spotted. To look away, to avert one's eyes, became a tell. In this new world of transparent sight, honesty became, for the first time, a visible, observable trait. The stage was set for a new kind of social contract, one built not merely on strength, but on the fragile, nascent currency of trust. Could it be that the very foundation of human morality, our ability to believe in the word and intention of another, is rooted in this simple, visible truth of our anatomy? This biological shift did not happen in a vacuum. It was forged in the fires of our deep past, a time we can only piece together from fragments of bone and stone. For our early ancestors, life was a precarious balance between the bounty of collective action and the ever-present danger of social betrayal. In a world where you relied on your band for food, defense, and warmth, knowing who was watching what and who was watching you was a matter of life and death. The gaze became our first social network, a silent, instantaneous system for sharing information and enforcing norms. To follow another's eyes was to see their world, to share their discovery. But to be caught in a lie, to have your eyes betray a hidden intention or a stolen morsel, was to risk ostracization, a death sentence in a social species. Thus, the eyes evolved into more than just sensory organs. They became instruments of a primitive, wordless morality. They were the unblinking judges of the tribe. This moral exoskeleton, built of shared glances and observed attention, bound groups together with invisible threads of mutual accountability. We were building societies not just with tools and fire, but with the very direction of our look. Is it possible that civilization itself began with a meeting of eyes across a campfire, a silent agreement understood in the whites of a glance? Now fast forward to the modern human, navigating a world of staggering complexity. The ancient hardware of our gaze is now running the sophisticated software of contemporary society. The principle, however, remains eerily unchanged. We still say the eyes are the windows to the soul, and we mean it. In a conversation, we seek eye contact as a sign of sincerity. A parent's disapproving glance can silence a child more effectively than a shout. a lover's gaze can convey volumes without a single word. This is the weapon of empathy, the ability to project and perceive shared feeling through a mere look. Our brains are exquisitely tuned to it. We can detect a direct gaze from across a room, and we feel a peculiar, almost primal discomfort when we are the subject of a stare. There is a vulnerability in being seen, a slight echo of that ancient fear of being caught, and conversely, the deceiver, the manipulator, must consciously work to control their eyes, to meet a gaze they instinctively wish to avoid. That internal conflict, the guilt that makes the eyes dart away, is a ghost in our machine, a leftover program from a time when transparency was the price of membership. In a world now full of artificial lights and screens, does this ancient need for an honest gaze explain why a moment of true, unguarded eye contact can feel so rare and so powerful? Yet, to romanticize this transparency would be to ignore its darker potential. For every tool of connection, there is a capacity for control. The same mechanism that allows for empathy also enables manipulation. A charismatic leader can wield a steady gaze not as a sign of truth, but as an instrument of persuasion, hypnotizing a crowd with the illusion of unwavering conviction. A predator, human or otherwise, can learn to fake the signs of honest attention, using our deep-seated trust in the eyes as a weapon against us. The ability to read a gaze is a form of power, and like all power, its morality is dictated not by the tool itself, but by the hand that wields it. Is the skill of reading eyes ultimately a force for good, or is it merely a more sophisticated way to navigate a social landscape forever fraught with competition and hidden agendas? Does it guide us toward ethical living, or simply make us more adept social players in a game where the stakes are high? Our status and survival? This leaves us with a haunting, beautiful paradox. If our evolutionary history hardwired us to be good because we might be seen, because those white sclera made our deceptions so perilously easy to catch, then what explains the acts of pure, anonymous goodness that defy this logic? Why does a person leap onto subway tracks to save a stranger with no audience but the terrified onlookers? Why does a donor give anonymously or a soldier fall on a grenade for comrades? These are acts that occur in a blinding flash, with no time for social calculation, no possibility of reward or recognition. The eyes that might have witnessed are turned away in horror or are simply not there. This suggests a morality that has been internalized, a compass that points true north even when no one is watching the needle. It hints at something that transcends the social pressure of the gaze, something that operates in the profound silence of individual choice. So if we are born with eyes that keep us honest, what is it that compels us to be good when the lights go out and all eyes are closed? What secret, silent force guides a hand to help a stranger it will never see again? See. The man doesn't think. He hears the scream, a sharp crack in the afternoon's quiet hum, and then he is moving. His feet pound against the wooden planks of the pier. His jacket is a discarded second skin on the dock, and the winter-choked water swallows him whole. The cold is a fist around his lungs, but his arms are already cutting through the murky current, pulling a stranger, a face he has never seen, a life he knows nothing about, back from the brink. Later, shivering under a foil blanket, he will have no real answer for the reporters. There was no reward, no promise of fame, only the very real risk of joining the drowning. So why? Why would he do it? For generations, the cold calculus of evolution seemed to have a simple answer. He wouldn't. Survival of the fittest is a selfish game, a relentless competition for resources and reproduction. Altruism, especially toward a non-relative, was a baffling glitch in the system, a puzzle that threatened to undermine the entire theory. How could a behavior that costs the individual and benefits an unrelated other possibly be selected for? It was an anomaly that demanded an explanation, and the answer, it turns out, might be written not in moral textbooks, but in the intricate chemistry of our own brains. Modern neuroscience has begun to peer into this paradox. Using functional MRI scanners, researchers observe the brain in the act of giving. They present subjects with a choice: keep a sum of money for themselves or donate it to a charity. The results are counterintuitive. When a person chooses to give, The brain's reward centers, the same ancient neural pathways that light up in response to food, sex, and other primary reinforcers, flare into activity. Dopamine, the molecule of craving and pleasure, floods the system. The act of helping, it appears, is its own reward. It feels good to be good. This suggests a profound rewiring of the evolutionary argument. Perhaps altruism isn't a glitch after all, but a brilliant, deep-seated adaptation. The man jumping into the river isn't defying his biology. He is fulfilling it. His heroic impulse is a primal urge, a neural command as compelling as thirst. The reward isn't external. It is the private chemical euphoria of having done the right thing. But if the drive is so deeply embedded within us, a fundamental part of our operating system, can we truly call it virtue? Or is it merely a sophisticated form of self-interest, a trick played by our own DNA to ensure cooperation? To understand why such a neural mechanism might exist, we must journey back, far beyond laboratories and fMRI machines, to the dawn of our species. Imagine the world of our Pleistocene ancestors, a vast, unpredictable landscape of savannas and forests. Survival was a group project. A lone human was a dead human. In this context, the first social contracts were written not in law, but in blood and mutual need. Anthropologists and archaeologists suggest that reciprocity became our first currency. I scratch your back today, trusting that you will scratch mine tomorrow. But this tit-for-tat only works if you see the same person again. What about the stranger, the individual from another band, encountered on the edge of known territory? Helping them was a gamble, a long-term investment in a future that may never come. A band known for its generosity might build a reputation, a cultural bank of goodwill. Their members, if lost or in trouble, would be more likely to receive aid from others. This created a selective pressure not just for strength or intelligence, but for prosociality. The groups that cooperated best, that could extend a modicum of trust even to outsiders, were more resilient, more flexible, and ultimately more successful. The helping hand offered to a stranger was, in the grand, slow-moving arc of evolution, a hand extended to the entire species. It was a bet on a shared future. Is our modern altruism, then, merely the echo of this ancient pragmatism, a ghost of a survival strategy playing out on a global stage? Today, this ancient impulse is channeled through the complex machinery of modern society. We donate blood to anonymous recipients. We transfer money to disaster relief funds on the other side of the planet. We volunteer our weekends at soup kitchens. We call this compassion, empathy, human decency. We wrap it in the language of morality and religion, seeing it as a triumph of our higher nature over a brutish past. But the neurochemical signature remains the same. That warm glow we feel after dropping coins into a collection tin, the sense of purpose after a day of volunteering. It is the same dopamine reward that motivated our ancestors. It is the same system that propelled the man into the icy river. This reframes the very concept of a selfless act. If our brains are wired to make us feel good when we help, is any act truly selfless? Or are we, in every generous moment, simply feeding a deep, innate, and personal hunger for meaning and connection? Are we heeding a call that feels spiritual but is, at its root, profoundly biological? Yet, this biological narrative is not the whole story. The human heart is a territory of mixed motives, and the impulse to help is often tangled with other, less noble vines. We must confront the uncomfortable reflection in the mirror. How much of our helping is performed for an audience? The multi-million-dollar charity gala, the viral video of a good deed, the public donation made in a company's name, these acts are undeniably beneficial, but they are also transactional. They trade aid for social capital, for prestige, for a polished public image. This is altruism as status signal. Even on a smaller scale, the desire for social approval, the fear of being seen as callous, the subtle pressure to conform to a group's ethical standards, these can all be powerful drivers. They complicate the clean chemical story of the brain's reward system. They introduce the ego. If a deed is done for the applause that follows or to avoid the silent judgment of our peers, does it retain its moral value? Or does it become merely another form of social currency, a more sophisticated way of building our own status? This leaves us on the precipice of a much darker, more difficult question. If the line between profound altruism and deep self-interest is this blurred, then where do we draw the line between justice and brutality? If our moral instincts are evolved tools for group cohesion, then they contain not only the capacity for boundless generosity, but also for ruthless exclusion. The same tribal wiring that makes us care for our own can justify unimaginable cruelty toward those labeled as other. The ultimate expression of group morality is not always saving a life. Sometimes it is taking one. A single figure stumbles at the edge of the firelight, shunned. The community has spoken. Its verdict, absolute. In the name of the group's survival, its harmony, its very sense of right and wrong, a life is extinguished. It is a punishment meted out not in rage, but in cold, collective agreement. It is presented as the moral choice, the necessary sacrifice for the greater good. This is the shadow side of the coin, the dark potential of the very instincts that make us heroic. The same brain that rewards us for giving can also reward us for punishing a transgressor, for enforcing the rules that bind the tribe together. So, we are left to wonder, is this the same impulse that drives the hero into the water, just twisted into a new, terrifying shape? When a society collectively decides to destroy one of its own for the sake of its perceived moral purity, is that the highest form of ethics, or its most profound betrayal? In the deep emerald heart of the Amazon, where the air is thick with the breath of 1,000,000 leaves and the constant, humid chorus of life, a story is told not in books, but in the quiet spaces between words. It is the story of a man from a small tribe, a man who, one evening, chose to hide his hunt. While the fire crackled and the community shared the day's bounty, he secreted away a prime cut of meat, a violation not of law, but of an unspoken, ancient covenant. The next morning, he was gone. No search party was formed. No wails of grief pierced the canopy. There was only a heavy, accepted silence. The oral histories passed down through generations offer a simple, chilling explanation for such absences. The betrayer is left to starve. They do not execute. They do not imprison. They simply remove. This act feels to us, from the outside, like a profound and cruel injustice. But to see it only as such is to misunderstand the deep, primal currents that shape social existence. It is not merely a punishment, it is a form of moral self-defense, an immunological response at the very soul of the group. The man did not just hide food, he fractured a trust so fundamental it held the community together. His disappearance was the social body rejecting a pathogen, healing a wound by sloughing off the dying flesh. The forest, indifferent and vast, simply swallowed the consequence. What does it mean for a community to define its survival not by who it embraces, but by who it must forget? To understand this, we must look beyond the village clearing, into the canopy itself. High above the forest floor, in the tangled world of our primate cousins, we see the same story written in the language of gesture and threat. In troops of chimpanzees or bands of baboons, an individual who consistently disrupts the social order, stealing food, breaking alliances, harming the young, does not remain a nuisance for long. The group's response is swift and severe, a coordinated attack, a chorus of aggressive barks, or perhaps, most potently, a total and utter isolation. The transgressor is shunned, forced to the periphery, denied the grooming and closeness that is the currency of primate life. This isn't about revenge, a concept requiring complex accounting of wrongs. It is a simpler, more brutal calculus. The stability of the group is paramount. Cooperation is the key to survival, and anything that threatens that cooperation is excised. Is this the primordial seed of justice? Not as an ideal, but as a biological imperative for collective existence? The evidence is not confined to the living. It is buried in the earth, waiting to be read by those who know how to listen. Archaeology offers us silent, stone-cold testimonies. In ancient burial sites, scattered across time and geography, we occasionally find an outlier, a skeleton separated from the others, interred in a shallow grave far from the communal resting place, or laid to rest with none of the grave goods, the tools, the ornaments, the offerings that signify a valued member of the community. These are not deaths from battle or accident. The bones often tell no tale of violence. They speak instead of a social death that preceded the physical one. These individuals, we can infer, were the transgressors of their day, the ones who broke the code. Before written law, before courts and constitutions, morality was a living thing, sustained by collective memory and enforced by the most powerful incentive of all, the threat of exile, of being unmade by the very people who defined your existence. Their punishment was to be forgotten by history, their story reduced to a cautionary whisper swallowed by the soil. If our morality is woven from the fabric of the group, what does it mean that its oldest enforcers were silence and exclusion? We like to believe we have evolved far beyond such primal brutality. We have built systems of dazzling complexity, legal codes, judicial principles, penitentiaries designed for rehabilitation, not erasure. We do not leave a man to starve for hiding a piece of meat. And yet, the old wiring still hums with latent power. Modern society may have swapped the jungle for the concrete one, but it has not shed the deep-seated instinct to identify and expel the betrayer. Our reactions to the traitor, the spy, the insider threat are among the most visceral and unforgiving in our entire social lexicon. The whistleblower who exposes uncomfortable truths is often framed not as a truth-teller, but as a breach of loyalty, and treated with a hostility that far exceeds their crime. The defector is a figure of ultimate contempt, their name forever stained. This ferocity reveals a startling truth. Our sense of morality, of right and wrong, is often inextricably bound to the concept of us versus them. The same action, sharing a secret, can be heroic if done for us, and treasonous if done for them. The emotional voltage behind the label traitor suggests that our ethics are perhaps less about universal principles of good and evil, and more about the primal urgent need to protect the tribe, whether that tribe is a nation, a corporation, or a family. Have we simply refined the art of exile, dressing it in the robes of law and public opinion? This, of course, leads us to a troubling and necessary counterpoint. If morality is primarily a tool for group cohesion, a mechanism to ensure survival by defining and defending boundaries, then can it truly be called universal? Or is it merely a sophisticated instrument of control? The man in the Amazon was, from his perspective, perhaps just ensuring his family's survival in a harsh world. The whistleblower believes they are serving a higher good that transcends their immediate group. Who, then, gets to define betrayal? The act itself, or the group that feels betrayed? This relativism cuts to the core of our philosophical pretensions. If our deepest ethical intuitions are just biological algorithms for group survival, then the concept of a universal, objective morality begins to dissolve into the mist. Is our lofty notion of good ultimately just a synonym for what is good for us? And so we are left not with an answer, but with a deeper, more resonant question. If the boundaries of morality are so often drawn around the perimeter of the group, then what does that make loyalty? Is it the highest virtue, the glue of civilization? Or is it merely an evolutionary artifact, a hardwired impulse to favor our own, a beautiful and powerful trick played on us by our genes to ensure their propagation? The story that began with a man vanishing into the trees does not end there. It echoes in the very first pact we ever made with another species, an alliance forged not in dominance, but in mutual recognition. It invites us to consider a different origin story for our conscience, one found not in the rule book, but in the gaze of a companion. Perhaps the faint, enduring trace of this ancient bond can be found in the one creature that chose to stand by our side, looking outward with us, defining a new us altogether. What if morality began not with a rule, but with a look of unwavering loyalty? In the permafrost of Siberia, a discovery is made. A grave over 12 millennia old holds the bones of a man and, curled at his feet, the skeleton of a small dog. The animal's remains show signs of advanced illness, withered limbs, teeth worn to the root, yet also the unmistakable evidence of care. It had been fed, tended to, and sheltered long after its utility had faded. It was not livestock, not a future meal. It was a companion. In a world defined by the stark arithmetic of survival, where every calorie expended must be justified by calories gained, this act is a profound anomaly. Why would our ancient ancestors, living on the very edge of existence, pour precious resources into a creature that offered no obvious return? This ancient burial is not merely a relic, it is a question whispered from the depths of time, asking us to consider the origins of a bond so powerful it defies logic, the bond of loyalty. The story of this bond begins not in the realm of culture or philosophy, but in the silent chemical language of biology. The dog holds a unique title in the human story. The first species to be welcomed across the threshold of our fires, the first to be shaped by our hands and our hearts. This was not a simple matter of capturing a useful animal. The wolf that skulked at the edge of the campfire's light was a competitor, a predator. The domestication of the dog was a mutual choice, a grand unspoken experiment in cross-species sociology. The catalyst may lie in a simple, powerful hormone, oxytocin. Often called the love molecule or the cuddle chemical, oxytocin flows in both human and canine brains when they lock eyes. It is the biochemical substrate of trust, of attachment, of the quiet contentment found in a shared gaze. In that moment, the ancient wolf and the ancient human were not two separate entities calculating gain. They were two social creatures, their very neurochemistry realigning to include the other. This was a pact written not on parchment, but in blood and brain chemistry. A bond forged not through force, but through a mutual self-reinforcing loop of affection. If loyalty has a physical signature, is this it? A silent molecular conversation that bypasses reason and speaks directly to the primal parts of our being that yearn for connection? This biological thread weaves itself into the very fabric of human history, leaving its mark in the soil of graves across the ancient world. From the frozen steppes of Siberia to the sun-baked plains of the Middle East, archaeology tells a consistent, poignant story. A woman buried in what is now Germany, 14,000 years ago, her hand resting on the skull of a small terrier-like dog. In ancient Egypt, dogs were often mummified and entombed with their owners, their names carefully inscribed on burial steles, names like Brave One or Reliable. In Persia, they were seen as sacred cleansers. In Norse mythology, a faithful hound stood by the side of the god Odin. These were not just hunting partners, though their prowess in the chase was undeniable. They had become symbols. They embodied a virtue that humans held in the highest esteem: unwavering loyalty, a fidelity that asked for no reason and demanded no reward. They became living metaphors for a perfect, unbreakable bond, a connection so pure it was sometimes deemed divine. By burying them with such care, were our ancestors merely honoring a pet, or were they attempting to ritualize and capture an ideal, to make tangible a concept as abstract as devotion itself? In our modern world, we have enshrined this ancient cross-species bond into the very pinnacle of our moral code. We speak of loyalty in love and friendship to our companies and our countries as a foundational virtue. It is a social contract, a glue that holds the complex machinery of human society together. We build legal systems, religious doctrines, and cultural norms around its expectation. We tell stories, sing songs, and make films celebrating its power. Yet the dog, this living relic from our deep past, presents us with a quiet, confounding paradox. A dog exhibits what we would call profound loyalty without a single sermon, without a page of law, without any concept of nationhood or moral philosophy. Its devotion is pre-cultural, pre-linguistic, seemingly innate. This forces an uncomfortable, beautiful question. If a creature without our complex cognition can embody our highest ideal, then what is the true nature of that ideal? Is our elaborate edifice of human morality, our promises, our oaths, our vows, merely a complex cultural echo of a much older, simpler biological truth? Have we spent millennia building cathedrals of words to describe something a dog just is? A counter-argument whispers from the corners of behaviorism and evolutionary psychology. It suggests that this entire narrative is a beautiful illusion, a story we project onto a simple biological mechanism. Loyalty, in this colder light, is not a moral virtue, but a calculated investment. It is a positive feedback loop of reinforced behavior. The dog that was loyal, that protected the camp and aided the hunt, was fed, sheltered, and cared for. Its genes prospered. The human who cared for the loyal dog gained a superior hunting partner and a living alarm system. Their genes prospered. What we romantically call loyalty is merely a successful evolutionary strategy, a mutually beneficial symbiosis that feels good because oxytocin rewards it. It is a transaction, polished by millennia of coevolution into the appearance of selfless virtue. Is the warmth we feel at a wagging tail just the glow of a successful deal, a primal satisfaction written into our DNA, masquerading as something higher? So, where does this leave us, caught between the poetry of the bond and the pragmatism of the gene? If the seeds of what we call morality, loyalty, care, self-sacrifice, can be found thriving in another species, then the walls of our moral kingdom are far less exclusive than we imagined. It forces us to look for a deeper, more fundamental layer of ethical experience, one that exists before culture and beyond language. This ancient dog, buried with such tenderness, points us toward that deeper layer. It suggests that the roots of our goodness may not be found in the grand treaties we sign or the doctrines we debate, but in the small, quiet, everyday choices to care for another being. It challenges the very definition of what it means to be moral. If loyalty can exist without reason, then perhaps true morality begins not when we follow a rule, but when we choose to extend our circle of care to something beyond ourselves, to something that cannot possibly repay the debt. This realization inevitably pulls our gaze from the faithful dog at the man's feet to the other figures gathered around the ancient fire. The old woman, her hands gnarled, her eyes clouded, who can no longer run with the hunters. The child, too small to contribute. The injured, the weak. Yet, they are fed. They are given their share of the precious meat, the hard-won fruit of the hunt. Why? Is it simply love, a raw emotional pull? Or is there a colder, more pragmatic calculus at work? Perhaps the old woman is the keeper of the stories, the living library of the tribe. Her memory holds the paths to the waterholes in a drought, the identity of a friendly clan beyond the mountains, the secret properties of a healing root. Her survival is an investment in the group's knowledge. The child is an investment in the future. In this act of sharing, are we seeing the first flicker of a social contract, a recognition that the strength of the whole is greater than the strength of its strongest individual part? Or is it something else, something less easily defined, a primal understanding that a community is not just a system of exchange, but a network of mutual care? When we choose to share our portion with those who cannot earn it, are we merely practicing a clever form of social insurance, or are we, in that moment, touching the very essence of what it means to be human? The old man sits by the fire, the deep lines on his face illuminated by the dancing flames. His leg, twisted and useless from a long-ago encounter with a beast or a fall from a rock face, is stretched out before him. Around him, the air is thick with the scent of roasted meat, a rare and celebratory bounty from the day's hunt. The younger men, muscles still coiled with the day's adrenaline, pass around chunks of flesh, and then a portion is placed before the old man. He did not run. He did not throw a spear. He could not even have carried water or wood. Yet, he eats. In a world governed by the brutal arithmetic of survival, where every calorie expended must be earned, This act is a profound mystery. Why, in a band perpetually balanced on the knife's edge of existence, would those who struggle to survive themselves share their precious energy with one who seems to offer nothing in return? This question hangs in the prehistoric air, a silent puzzle that echoes far beyond that single fire. It feels like an ancient spark of pure compassion, a defiance of nature's cold logic. But perhaps the answer is not written in the language of morality, but in the slow, patient script of evolution itself. The grandmother hypothesis offers a compelling, if clinical, explanation. It suggests that the value of an individual is not solely in their ability to hunt or bear children, but in the treasure trove of knowledge they carry. A post-reproductive female, a grandmother, could forage for roots and nuts to feed her grandchildren, freeing her daughter to have more children, more quickly. She was a living library of survival, knowing which plants healed, which berries killed, where to find water in the driest season. Her mere presence increased the survival odds of her genetic lineage. The care shown to the elderly, then, becomes a strategic investment in the future, a way of ensuring that hard-won wisdom does not vanish with a single misstep. The meat shared with the old man is not a charity. It is a payment for services rendered to the gene pool. It is a down payment on the survival of the stories he has yet to tell. But if compassion is merely a clever genetic strategy, does that strip it of its nobility, reducing our highest virtues to a simple biological transaction? The earth itself provides a testament to this ancient contract of care. Archaeologists have pulled skeletons from graves that are tens of thousands of years old, and the bones tell a story that silences the simplistic notion of a brutish, short life. There is Shanidar I, a Neanderthal man who lived in what is now Iraq. His skull shows a crushing blow that likely blinded him in one eye. His arm was withered and possibly amputated, and he walked with a crippling limp. Yet he survived for years after these injuries. His people did not abandon him. They sheltered him, fed him, and helped him live. His value was not in his strength, but in his continued existence within the group. He was a walking map, a repository of knowledge about migratory patterns, changing climates, and the healing properties of local flora. In a world without writing, an elder was a living hard drive, and protecting them was equivalent to backing up the most vital data. Their broken bones, carefully healed, are fossils of empathy. They are silent proof that our ancestors understood a profound truth. A community is only as strong as its collective memory. But does this evidence of care prove a deep-seated morality, or merely a pragmatic calculation of utility? If the old man had no knowledge to offer, would his bones have been found nestled in the safety of a cave, or bleached white under an indifferent sun? Our modern world has institutionalized this ancient impulse. We have built a vast and complex architecture of care around our elderly: pension systems, retirement homes, social security, and laws against neglect. We speak of it in the language of respect, honor, and moral duty. We have codified the sharing of meat by the fire into a social contract. We see it as a mark of our civilization, a line separating us from the beasts. But if this moral duty has its roots in the cold, hard calculus of evolutionary biology, does that corrupt its purity? Is our modern respect for the elderly a genuine ethical evolution, or are we simply acting out a deeply ingrained program, a ghost of a survival strategy that once served our genes? We clothe our actions in the language of virtue, but are we just following a script written by our ancestors' need to survive? Can a kindness that began as a calculation ever truly become selfless? A darker, more cynical possibility whispers from the edges of this thought. Perhaps the sharing of resources was never about the individual elder at all, but about the group's self-interest. Maintaining the ritual of care, even for a seemingly useless member, reinforces a critical social bond. It signals to everyone, the strong hunter, the young mother, the child, that they too will be cared for if misfortune befalls them. It is a promise of security that glues the tribe together. It is an insurance policy written in meat and mutual obligation. The old man is not valued for his knowledge, but for his role as a symbol. He is the guarantee that the tribe does not abandon its own. This turns the noble narrative on its head. The act is not compassionate but transactional. It is about maintaining a system that benefits everyone else. So, where does this leave our old man by the fire? Is he a revered elder or merely a convenient prop in a social drama? If he truly had nothing to offer, no stories, no wisdom, no symbolic value, would the moral imperative to care for him simply evaporate? When kindness extends beyond the useful, it acquires a different weight, a deeper resonance. It becomes a choice rather than an instinct, a principle rather than a policy. It suggests that our humanity might be defined not by what we can get, but by what we can give, even when there is no obvious return on the investment. This is where biology might end and something else, something we call ethics or the soul, might begin. We have built entire societies on the premise that a life has intrinsic value, beyond its utility. We feed the old man because it is the right thing to do, not because he might know where the berries are. This feels like a higher truth. But is it a truth we truly live by, or just a story we tell ourselves to feel civilized? The answer might not be found in grand philosophies or scientific journals, but in a much simpler, more universal scene. A child's hand hovers over a forbidden jar of sweets. She takes one, then two, her heart pounding with a mixture of thrill and terror. Then she hears a footstep. Her head whips around, but she does not look to see who is coming. Instead, her eyes dart away, fixing on the floor, the wall, anything but the doorway. She is afraid of being seen. This instinct to avoid the gaze of judgment is primal. It is the root of shame, the fear of exclusion from the tribe, the anticipation of disapproval. It is the most basic social survival skill. We teach children right from wrong, but perhaps the first lesson they learn is the fear of getting caught. This is where the conscience is born, not in a lofty understanding of virtue, but in the visceral desire to remain in the good graces of the tribe, to stay within the circle of light around the fire. So we are left to wonder, does our morality, for all its complexity and grandeur, truly begin with something as simple and as fragile as a shared glance? And if the foundation of our ethics is laid in the fear of a judging eye, can we ever claim our goodness is truly our own? A child's hand closes around a stolen sweet. The mother's voice, soft yet heavy with knowing, cuts through the quiet. Did you take it? The child's head drops, a tiny anchor of shame. The eyes, once bright with curiosity, now fixate on the floor, the wall, anything but the truth held in the mother's gaze. No one has yet taught this child that lying is wrong. The concepts of morality, of sin, of ethical codes are still years away, locked in the language of adults. And yet, the body already knows. The gaze instinctively flees. The small shoulders hunch, preparing for a blow that is not physical, but social. It is a primal, pre-linguistic cringe. Why? What ancient, deep-seated wiring in this young human compels this universal, silent confession? This retreat of the eyes, this biological flinch from a judging stare, feels less like a learned behavior and more like an echo from a much older, darker forest. It may be one of our most fundamental evolutionary heirlooms. For our distant ancestors, survival was not a solo endeavor, but a fragile contract woven within a tribe. To be caught in a transgression, hoarding food, shirking a duty, violating a social norm, meant more than a scolding. It risked ostracization, exile, a death sentence delivered not by claw and tooth, but by collective silent disapproval. The body, therefore, learned to hide the evidence of its betrayal before the mind could even articulate the crime. The averted gaze is a primal piece of diplomacy, a nonverbal plea for mercy, an attempt to make the self smaller, less visible to the tribunal of peers. Deep within the brain, in the ancient limbic system where emotion and social processing intertwine, a circuit fires. We might call its output guilt, but perhaps it is simply a sophisticated alarm system, a neural cocktail of fear, anxiety, and social self-preservation, screaming a single command: Do not be seen. There is no stone tablet from the Paleolithic era etched with Moral Code Section 1. No cave painting depicts the proper etiquette for sharing mammoth meat. How then was this deep-seated social fear transmitted? We must imagine the cradle of humanity not as an idyllic paradise, but as a relentless classroom of survival. In a small band of hunter-gatherers, every pair of eyes was a potential witness, every gesture a form of communication. A child's education in belonging was conducted not through lectures, but through a constant, silent exchange of glances. The disapproval in an elder's stare, the warning in a parent's narrowed eyes, the collective gaze of the group resting upon a wrongdoer. These were the first and most powerful textbooks. The feeling of being watched, of one's actions having an invisible audience, was baked into the very experience of being human. Long before the invention of gods or laws, the tribe itself was the ever-present witness, and its gaze was the forge in which our earliest conscience was hammered into shape. We like to believe we have evolved far beyond that primitive stage, that our morality is now a grand, internalized cathedral of principles. But step into a modern classroom. A teacher's silent stare can halt a note-passing student more effectively than a shout. A parent's disappointed look can crush a teenager's defiance. Our entire justice system, with its courtrooms and judges, is a formalized theater of gaze. The accused sits under the concentrated scrutiny of the state and society. And now, in the digital age, we have engineered the ultimate panopticon, the social media platform, where 1,000,000 invisible eyes can judge a single action, and the fear of their collective gaze dictates behavior, brands reputations, and enforces new, unwritten codes. It seems the architecture of our ethics, for all its sophistication, might still rest upon a very simple, very old foundation: the fear of being caught. But here the plot thickens, and a crucial distinction must be made. Does the averted gaze truly signal a moral understanding, a feeling of genuine guilt for the act itself? Or is it merely the physical manifestation of a more basic, self-interested fear, the fear of punishment? The child avoids the mother's eyes not because it has internalized the wrongness of stealing, but because it anticipates the loss of dessert or the sting of a reprimand. The body's ancient alarm is ringing, but it is an alarm for the self, not a lament for the broken rule. This is the chasm between shame and guilt, between social compliance and ethical conviction. One is the fear of exposure. The other is the pain of having transgressed one's own values, even if no one is watching. The flinch of the eyes, our oldest tell, might only be evidence of the former. It reveals our deep social wiring, our instinct for self-preservation within a group, but it remains silent on the question of whether we possess a true, autonomous moral compass. This leads us to a precipice of a question, one that has haunted philosophers and tyrants alike. If the seed of what we call goodness is not an innate moral truth, but a learned response to the threat of observation, then what becomes of morality in the absence of a witness? If we behave well only because we feel the weight of a gaze, be it a parent's, a tribe's, a god's, or a camera's, then what are we when we are truly, utterly alone? Strip away all eyes, remove every possibility of discovery. In that perfect, silent isolation, does the internal compass still point north, or does it spin wildly, freed from the magnetic pull of social judgment? The averted gaze of the child is the beginning of the story, not its end. It shows us the powerful cradle of social morality, but it forces us to wonder if we ever truly leave it. What ancient choice, then, would reveal the true material of our moral core when no tribe is there to watch? Imagine a scene 50,000 years ago. The air is cold, sharp with the scent of pine and damp earth. A hunter, let's call him Ka, crouches by a flickering fire, the flames casting long dancing shadows on the cave wall. His world is small, defined by the known faces of his kin, the familiar paths through the forest, the immediate threats of tooth and claw. Now, present him with a conundrum that would baffle modern ethicists. A rock slide is tumbling down, threatening to crush 5 members of a distant clan gathering berries in the ravine. To divert it, he must trigger a smaller slide that will certainly kill one person, his own brother, sleeping just up the path. There is no philosophy here, no Kant, no utilitarianism, no dense textbooks on morality. There is only the visceral clench in the gut, the primal scream of the blood. What does he do? The answer, etched into his very bones, might be the ghost in the machine of our own modern moral dilemmas. This is the Stone Age trolley problem, a test drive of ethical engines that were assembled long before we even had wheels. The wiring for this choice is buried deep within us, in the ancient code of our biology. In the silent, patient language of evolution, behavior is not judged as good or evil, but as successful or unsuccessful. Success is measured by one brutal, elegant metric: the perpetuation of genetic material. This is the foundation of what evolutionary biologists call kin selection. The imperative is not to save the most lives in the abstract, but to protect the lives that carry copies of your own genes. Saving your brother, even at a great cost, is a sound evolutionary strategy. His survival increases the odds that the unique genetic constellation you share will endure into the next generation. It is a cold calculation written in the warm language of love and loyalty. This instinctual preference is our first moral compass, a needle forever twitching toward blood relation. It forces us to ask, is our deepest sense of right and wrong truly about universal principles, or is it merely a sophisticated, feeling-driven mechanism for genetic preservation? Are we navigating by the stars of philosophy, or simply following the scent of our own tribe? The evidence of this primordial bias is not just in our genes. It is literally buried in the ground, waiting to be unearthed. Archaeology offers a silent testimony to these Stone Age values. We find graves not of anonymous masses, but of carefully arranged individuals, often nestled together, a child curled against an adult, a man and a woman hand in hand, surrounded by ochre and simple tokens. These are not random acts. They speak of a profound connection that extended beyond life itself. The settlements we uncover are tiny, clusters of hearths and huts that likely housed extended family units. Their survival depended on an unbreakable web of mutual obligation and fierce protection. In a world of scarcity and constant danger, the unit was everything. The stranger was not just an unknown. They could be competition, a carrier of disease, a threat. If Ka, our hunter, was forced to choose, his entire world, forged in the daily struggle to protect his small circle, would compel his hand. The choice to save his brother would be as natural as breathing. The bones in the ground whisper that our earliest communities were built not on the idea of humanity, but on the tighter, more immediate bond of kinship. The moral community was a family, and its borders were drawn in blood. And yet we live in a world that preaches a different gospel. Modern society teaches us a morality that is expansive, objective, and universal. We are told from childhood that all lives have equal value, that we must be impartial, that justice should be blind. We build legal systems and ethical frameworks on this very premise. But then, we are presented with a modern version of Ka's dilemma, the trolley problem. And something fascinating happens. When the hypothetical lever is pushed and the 5 strangers are weighed against one beloved family member, the polished facade of impartial morality often cracks. The gut, that ancient organ, overrules the brain. The heart, tuned to a rhythm older than civilization, pounds out a different answer. A significant majority of people, when pressed, confess they would save their loved one. It is a jarring disconnect. We can intellectually agree with the principle of saving the greater number, but the thought of sacrificing a father, a child, a partner, feels like a profound and unforgivable betrayal. This is the echo of the cave, the shadow of the firelight still playing on the walls of our modern conscience. It suggests that, for all our reasoning, the oldest parts of us still hold a veto power. Has thousands of years of civilization merely layered a thin veneer of philosophy over a much deeper, more stubborn bedrock of instinct? But the story is not so simple. To claim we are merely slaves to this ancient wiring is to ignore the breathtaking exceptions that define some of humanity's finest hours. For every instinct to protect our own, there is a counterexample of stunning selflessness directed at perfect strangers. The firefighter who races into an inferno without knowing how many are inside or who they are. The doctor who works tirelessly through a plague to save lives in a distant city. The soldier who falls on a grenade to save his squad. A band of brothers and sisters forged not by blood but by shared purpose. These are not anomalies. They are celebrated pillars of our culture. This appears to be a direct reversal of the evolutionary imperative. It suggests that something powerful has emerged alongside our biology, culture itself. We have created stories, ideals, and institutions that can actively work against our baser instincts, encouraging us to expand our circle of moral concern far beyond the narrow limits of kinship. This cultural force can, at times, convince us that a stranger's life is worth as much as our brother's. It can inspire us to value abstract principles like duty, honor, and compassion above genetic survival. So, is culture the master that can leash and redirect the primal hound of evolution? So where does this leave us, suspended between the cave and the cosmos? When the siren call of ancient blood clashes with the learned chorus of universal ethics, who wins? The answer is never clear, and perhaps it is in that very tension that our humanity resides. We are creatures of both instinct and instruction, of emotion and reason. The conflict is not a bug in our system. It is the system itself. Perhaps the true cradle of our morality, the place where this eternal debate was first negotiated, was not in a lecture hall or a courtroom, but thousands of years ago, in the flickering light of a shared fire. It was there that the first stories were told, tales of heroes and monsters, of sacrifice and betrayal. These narratives were the original moral laboratories, the safe space to explore the consequences of choices long before we had to make them in the real world. They were the tools that began the slow, painstaking work of convincing a species designed for tribe to care for a world. And if that is true, then what power might a single story hold to bend the arc of a heart away from its ancient instincts and toward a new, broader horizon? Around the flickering flames of a primeval campfire, shadows dance on the faces of the listeners. A voice low and steady speaks not of the day's hunt, but of a hunter who shared his meat with the weak and of another who hoarded it and was shunned. Millennia later, the glow is from a smartphone screen, where a 60-second TikTok video unfolds a miniature drama of a stranger's kindness on a subway platform. The medium has transformed, but the impulse remains, an unbroken thread woven through the tapestry of human existence. We are a species of storytellers, and our most enduring tales are not about what is, but about what ought to be. They are moral tales. But why? Why does humanity seem to require narrative to convey its deepest ethical codes? Why not simply state the rules, carve them in stone, and be done with it? Perhaps the answer begins not in the library, but in the laboratory, within the very architecture of our minds. Our brains appear to be wired for narrative, a biological cradle waiting for a story to be laid within it. Information delivered as a dry list of facts, do this, don't do that, activates specific, limited neural pathways. But a story, rich with character, conflict, and emotional stakes, is a neurological fireworks display. It engages the prefrontal cortex, where logic resides, but it also lights up the limbic system, the ancient seat of emotion and memory. When we hear of a character's betrayal, our own capacity for trust and fear is subtly engaged. When we witness a fictional act of courage, our mirror neurons fire as if we ourselves were performing the brave deed. This neural resonance is the bedrock of empathy, and empathy is the fundamental currency of morality. It is the ability to feel, however faintly, the joy or the suffering of another. A rule can tell you not to steal, but a story can make you feel the cold dread of the widow who discovers her last coin is gone, the hollow desperation in her stomach. The rule provides the map, but the story provides the journey, making the destination of goodness a place one has already visited, and yearns to return to. Is our morality, then, less a philosophical construct and more a biological echo, a story whispered from one mind to another across the campfire of time? Long before the written word, in the profound silence of places like Lascaux, our ancestors were already telling these stories. The magnificent paintings of bulls, horses, and hunters are not merely a gallery of prey. They are a prehistoric graphic novel, a narrative frozen in ochre and charcoal. Scholars suggest these chambers were less like museums and more like cathedrals or communal theaters. Here, in the flickering torchlight, the shaman might not have just pointed to a painting of a successful hunt. He might have narrated it. He would have woven a tale of the hunter who showed respect to the spirit of the animal, who followed the rituals, who shared the bounty with the tribe, and contrasted it with the fate of the arrogant hunter who failed to do so. This was not entertainment in the modern sense. It was a vital technology for social cohesion. In a world without police or courts, the story was the most effective tool to broadcast and reinforce the nascent moral code of the group. It transmitted the values of cooperation, respect, and reciprocity far more powerfully than a simple command ever could. The story became the social glue, binding individuals together with shared myths and common ethical understandings. It turned a collection of individuals into a culture. Could it be that the very concept of right and wrong was not decreed, but discovered through the collective act of storytelling? In our modern world, this ancient machinery hums along, seamlessly integrated into the fabric of our lives. We have simply swapped cave walls for cinema screens and campfires for curated social media feeds. The fairy tales we read to children are not mere fantasies. They are moral simulators. The story of Cinderella is a complex lesson about resilience in the face of cruelty and the idea that true worth is internal, not defined by circumstance. A blockbuster film about a hero's sacrifice is a communal ritual where thousands of people simultaneously practice feeling the pull of a greater good. Even the simplest Good Samaritan anecdote shared over coffee serves as a tiny, potent reinforcement of social norms. A well-told story of a small kindness can often do more to shape a child's behavior than 1,000 stern admonitions. This raises a profound and unsettling question. If a story can bypass our critical faculties and speak directly to our emotions, is the morality it instills truly rational? Or are we merely being trained to feel a certain way, to be moved by a particular narrative arc, mistaking that emotional resonance for a genuine ethical compass? This is the central tension, the paradox at the heart of the moral tale. If our sense of right and wrong is absorbed emotionally through the stories we consume, can we truly claim it as our own reasoned conclusion? Or is it a kind of sophisticated emotional contagion, a morality of sentiment where we learn to applaud the hero and boo the villain on cue? Does this make our ethics any less real? Or does it simply reveal that reason and emotion are not opposing forces, but partners in a delicate lifelong dance? The story gives us the what, but it is our conscious mind that must grapple with the why. This grappling requires a specific cognitive talent, one that is curiously linked to both storytelling and self-control. It is the ability to hold multiple possibilities in mind, to project ourselves into a future that does not yet exist, to imagine the consequences of our actions. It is the engine of narrative itself, the what if. And it finds a fascinating parallel in a simple experiment with a marshmallow. A child is offered one treat now, or two if they can wait alone for a short period. The struggle is epic, a silent drama of desire versus delayed gratification. This ability to wait, to inhibit an immediate impulse for a greater future reward, is a cornerstone of executive function. But could it also be a foundational block of moral reasoning? To choose honesty over a lie, generosity over selfishness, often requires us to imaginatively project ourselves into a future where trust matters and community has value. It requires us to tell ourselves a story where the second marshmallow, the reward for virtue, is real. Did our ancestors around those ancient fires practice this same skill? Were they not just telling stories of cooperation, but also training the young to imagine, to wait, to believe in a narrative larger than their immediate desire? If morality is a story we tell ourselves about how to live, then is the capacity to imagine a different, better ending the very thing that makes us moral creatures? A child is offered a single marshmallow. The rule is simple: a tiny pact with the future. Wait 15 minutes without eating it, and a second, fluffy prize will be yours. The room is quiet, the treat tantalizing. Roughly half the children succumb, the sweet pill dissolving on their tongues in a moment of pure, present joy. The other half wait. They fidget, they sing, they cover their eyes, they enact small, private rituals of delay. The fascinating part emerged years later. Those who waited on average tended to navigate life with a seeming advantage: better grades, more stable friendships, a heightened social grace. This was the marshmallow test, and it seemed to measure more than willpower. It hinted at a blueprint for success. But could it also, in its stark simplicity, be pointing to the very cradle of our moral self? Is the ability to resist a tiny temptation the first, fragile thread from which we weave our entire ethical universe? The impulse to grab and consume is ancient, a primal script written deep in the oldest parts of our brain. It is the territory of the amygdala, the quick-fire engine of fear and desire that screams now: to wait, to calculate, to imagine a future that is not yet real. This is the work of the prefrontal cortex, the evolved, deliberative newcomer in our cranial architecture. This neural dance between the immediate urge and the delayed reward might be one of the most fundamental biological prerequisites for what we later call morality. It is the physical capacity to see a horizon beyond the present moment, to perform a simple calculus: the small, certain pleasure of this now versus the larger, potential benefit of a then that has not yet arrived. This is not lofty virtue. It is neural bookkeeping. Yet, from this cold calculus, something warmer emerges. The choice not to steal the bread, even when no one is watching, is a marshmallow test writ large. It is the foregoing of a small, immediate gain, the full stomach, for a much larger, abstract, and delayed reward: the integrity of the self, the trust of a community, a social order. The brain that can hold the concept of that abstract future, a future of respect, of belonging, of principle, is a brain that has learned to trade a marshmallow for two. Is our ethical sense, then, not a divine whisper, but merely the highest function of a brain sophisticated enough to play the long game? We can almost see this calculus etched into the bones of our past. Imagine a small band of early humans, shadows moving against the vast canvas of a glacial plain. A successful hunt yields a mammoth, a sudden, staggering windfall of calories in a world of scarcity. The immediate impulse, the amygdala's roar, would be to gorge, to consume in a frantic feast until the meat was gone. But groups that cultivated the prefrontal cortex's whisper, groups that could delay that gratification, held a profound advantage. They were the ones who learned to smoke and store meat, to distribute it according to social rank or need, to share it with those who had not hunted, to bank its energy against the lean times to come. This was not charity. It was strategic hoarding. It was the first marshmallow test played with survival itself. The reward for waiting was not just a second sweet, but the continuation of the tribe. The social rules that enforced this delay, the taboos against hoarding, the rituals of sharing, the praise for the generous and the scorn for the gluttonous, became the scaffolding of a proto-morality. This was a practical ethic, a set of rules for managing scarcity and desire. The individual sacrificed immediate satiation for the long-term payoff of group stability and personal status within it. Was our earliest concept of good simply what was most useful for our collective future? This ancient negotiation between now and later is a thread that runs directly into the fabric of our modern world. Today, we rarely face the test with a literal marshmallow. Instead, we face it in 1,000 invisible ways. The choice to tell the truth, even when a lie would bring a swift and easy benefit, is a marshmallow test. You trade the immediate reward of avoiding conflict or gaining an advantage for the deferred and far greater reward of trust and a reputation for integrity. The decision to not take the office supplies, to not cheat on the exam, to pay taxes for services you may not directly use. Each of these acts requires the mental machinery to value a distant, abstract, social good over a close, tangible, personal one. Our entire legal and ethical systems are, in a sense, vast cultural monuments to the principle of delayed gratification. They are structures built to incentivize waiting, to make the second marshmallow not just a promise, but a certainty. We call this self-control, willpower, duty. We celebrate it as a virtue. But is it? Or is it merely the application of a successful cognitive strategy, honed over millennia, to the complex social marketplace of the modern age? Have we simply learned to dress a deeply pragmatic survival skill in the elegant clothes of moral philosophy? Yet, the story is not so clean, the binary of pass/fail too brittle to hold the weight of a human life. To label the child who eats the marshmallow as lacking, as destined for a lesser path, is to commit a grave error of reduction. What if the child comes from a home of scarcity, where promises are often broken and treats are rare? For that child, the rational, intelligent choice is to eat the marshmallow. The world has taught them that the future is not a promise but a gamble, and a sure treat now is worth infinitely more than a hypothetical one later. Their action is not a failure of morality or will. It is a brilliant adaptation to an environment of uncertainty. Anxiety, hunger, a lack of trust in the adult making the promise, all these factors can dictate the outcome far more than some inherent, fixed capacity for virtue. This forces an uncomfortable question. If our moral behavior is so exquisitely sensitive to context, to the nutrients in our blood, and the safety in our homes, can we truly speak of a universal, unwavering ethical core? Is what we call goodness simply the luxury of those who have been promised, and have come to believe in, the second marshmallow? This paradox leads us to a seemingly irrational shore. Consider communities living in profound material poverty, where every calorie is counted, every resource stretched to its limit, and then witness the elaborate, often lavish funerals they conduct. Families will invest staggering sums, savings that could have fed them for months, that could have been the down payment on a more secure future, into the rituals of death. They delay their own gratification, their own material well-being, not for a larger personal reward, but for something else entirely. This is not the marshmallow test. This is its inverse. It is the sacrifice of a tangible, life-improving later for an intangible, symbolic now. It is the expenditure of real resources for a principle. Honor, respect, tradition, the proper order of things. The calculus is not of personal gain, but of cultural continuity. So where does this fit in our narrative? If morality is born from the brain's shrewd calculation for future payoff, how do we explain these profound investments in the past, in the dead, in the symbolic? Perhaps the tapestry of ethics is woven from more than one thread. Perhaps alongside the logic of delay runs the logic of meaning, a need to belong to a story larger than our own individual survival. This leaves us not with an answer, but with a richer, more troubling question. If the child who waits and the community that spends are both, in their own ways, making a moral choice, then what truly is the currency of virtue? Is it the cold coin of calculated future benefit, or the warm, immeasurable weight of a value that exists entirely outside of time? In Madagascar, families will spend a month's income, sometimes more, on the famadihana, the turning of the bones. They exhume their ancestors, rewrap them in fresh, costly silk shrouds, and dance with the corpses to live music. In Vietnam, a son might sell a parcel of ancestral land, the very foundation of his family's future, to fund a funeral deemed worthy of his parents. Why does death demand such opulence, such profound ceremony? The departed cannot see the flowers, hear the eulogies, or feel the respect we strain to convey. They are, by every objective measure, beyond the reach of our gestures. So why do we persist? Is this elaborate, often financially crippling, performance a genuine moral act, one of the purest expressions of our humanity, or is it something else entirely? If we could trace this impulse back to its very origins, we might find its roots not in culture or religion, but in the deep, silent coding of life itself. Long before philosophy gave us the language of ethics, biology may have provided the blueprint. The act of honoring the dead is perhaps one of our first and most crucial abstractions, a cognitive leap that separates us from the immediate instinctual world. An animal understands death as a cessation, a void where a companion once stood. It may grieve, but it does not build monuments. Humans, however, perform a miraculous feat of the mind. We project the concept of a person beyond their physical expiration. We sustain their presence in memory, in story, in the very earth we mark with stones. This ability to connect across generations, to feel a debt to those who are forever gone, forged a new kind of bond. It strengthened group identity, turning a mere collection of individuals into a tribe, a lineage, a people with a shared past and a collective future. This cohesion was a survival tool of immense power. A group that remembers its ancestors is a group that cares for its living. The duty to the dead becomes the glue for the community of the living. Could it be that this biological imperative, the drive to strengthen the tribe through ritualized remembrance, is the ancient, whispering precursor to what we now call filial piety? Is the profound moral weight we feel at a funeral simply an echo of an ancient survival strategy, now dressed in the clothes of sacred duty? The evidence is not merely written in our genes. It is buried in the earth, waiting to be unearthed. Journey back to the dawn of settlement, to places like Çatalhöyük in Anatolia or the ancient layers of Jericho. Here, archaeologists brush dust from skeletons that are not simply discarded. They are found curled in the fetal position beneath the hearths of homes nestled in the very center of domestic life. They are adorned with beads, covered in ochre pigment, or buried with precious tools and ornaments, valuable resources taken out of circulation forever. This was not disposal. This was ceremony. This was investment. These prehistoric people, grappling with the basics of survival, chose to allocate their scarce time and immense labor to acts that offered no tangible return. They were building something invisible, a relationship with the past, a narrative of continuity. They were assigning a moral value to history and to the people who composed it. By honoring the dead, they were making a statement about what it meant to be alive and part of a continuum. The funeral rite, then, emerges from the deepest past, not as a frivolity, but as a foundational human activity. It is the moment we first looked at a cold body and saw more than decaying matter. We saw a story that demanded respect, a life that demanded honor. Does this ancient need to ritualize our goodbye suggest that morality itself is, in part, a story we build around the silence of death? In our modern world, the funeral has been refined, commercialized, and codified. Yet its core paradox remains, perhaps even intensifies. Today, a funeral is rarely just an expression of grief. It is a densely packed symbol of our deepest moral convictions, filial devotion, communal respect, and the enduring promise of memory. We speak of giving someone a proper send-off, a phrase that implies a transaction of duty, a final payment on a debt of love. But this is where the moral question sharpens to a fine point. When a family living in poverty feels compelled to take on crippling debt to stage a lavish coffin and a procession of black cars, what force is at work? Is this the ultimate triumph of morality over base survival, a testament to the human spirit that values honor above comfort, that places duty to the departed above the needs of the living? Or does the sheer economic pressure expose a darker, more complex social machinery? The ritual becomes a performance, and every performance has an audience. The mourners are not just grieving, they are being watched. Their actions are measured against a communal standard of what is right. The weight is not just of loss, but of expectation. Can a moral act remain purely moral when it is executed under the immense pressure of social judgment? This is the counter-argument that whispers from the edges of the graveyard. For all its profound biological and historical roots, the modern funeral can easily become a theater of social conformity. The lavishness of the flowers, the length of the procession, the number of attendees, these become metrics of a family's worth, their respectability, and their social standing. The proper funeral is no longer just for the deceased. It is for the neighbors, the relatives, the entire community that will talk. The language of morality, we must do right by him. It's what she deserved, can become a veil, obscuring a raw competition for social capital and a deep-seated fear of shame. The genuine, private grief of a daughter is amplified and distorted by the public stage on which it must be performed. The tears are real, but are the trappings? When the cost of a coffin becomes a symbol of love, does the act of mourning risk becoming a commodity? Can we ever truly disentangle the sincere moral impulse to honor a life from the desperate human need to be seen as moral? So we are left in a quiet courtyard after the last guest has departed, surrounded by the echoes of a ritual that feels both innate and imposed. The question shifts then from the act itself to the unseen gaze that might govern it. If the roots of this duty are in strengthening the group, and its modern expression is policed by the group's eyes, what happens when we are truly, utterly alone? The funeral is a public act, but what of our private, unseen thoughts? The belief that grounds this entire complex moral behavior, the belief in a persistent relationship with the one who is gone, requires a final, breathtaking abstraction. It requires a belief that the departed themselves are in some way still watching, that they know, that they care about the ceremony we conduct. We are not just performing for the living community around us. We are performing for an audience of one in the silent realm of the dead. This introduces a fascinating paradox. It suggests that the origin of a very internalized moral compass, the feeling of being watched and judged, might be found in our relationship with those who can no longer see us at all. We internalize the gaze of the ancestors until it becomes our own conscience. And if we can conjure an unseen witness from the ranks of the dead, how small a step is it to imagine a divine one? When humanity began to believe in an all-seeing eye, a force that witnessed every action in the deepest darkness of solitude, did we simply take the ghost of a departed ancestor and expand it to a cosmic scale? Did this belief finally complete the architecture of morality, creating a law that governed not just public acts, but the most private of thoughts? If we behave well at a funeral for fear of a parent's ghostly disapproval, what stops us from stealing when no human eye is upon us? Perhaps the same thing. The stage expands, the audience changes, but the performance continues, forever judged by eyes we can never see. The final, lingering question then is not about the cost of the coffin or the size of the crowd. It is about the nature of the theater itself. If we strip away the community, the social pressure, the fear of shame, and even the love for the departed, are we left with a purely moral impulse or simply an empty stage? The coffee machine sits in a quiet corner, a humble altar to our daily rituals. Next to it, a small box for payments operates on the honor system. But on this day, the box is not alone. Above it, a simple poster is taped to the wall. It holds nothing but a pair of eyes, rendered in stark black and white, gazing forward with an unnerving intensity. They are not real. They are ink on paper. And yet, something remarkable happens. The coins and bills in the box multiply. People, unconsciously, pay more for their coffee. They feel the weight of a gaze, a silent witness to their choice, and they respond. It is a whisper from our deepest past, a ghost of a feeling that shaped us long before we could even name it. If a mere image can command our conscience, then what invisible threads connect us to the idea of an unseen watcher? What is this ancient, silent dialogue between the one who acts and the one who might be watching? Our brains are ancient forests, wired with pathways laid down over millions of years. Deep within this neural wilderness, a specific alarm is tripped by the direct gaze of another. It is an instinct, swift and wordless, a jolt of awareness that bypasses all higher reasoning. Neuroscientists have watched this happen. Functional MRI scans light up specific regions, the amygdala, the superior temporal sulcus, when a subject meets another's eyes. This reaction is so primal, so hardwired, that it fires even when our conscious mind knows the eyes are not real. The poster experiment proves it. We are biologically tuned to the presence of a watcher. This is likely a gift from our deep evolutionary past, a mechanism for social cohesion. In a small tribe, survival depended on cooperation and reputation. To be seen acting selfishly, hoarding food, or shirking a duty could mean exile or death. The feeling of being observed became an internal compass, a way to regulate behavior even in the momentary absence of authority. It was the first draft of morality, written not in words, but in the electric fear of being caught. Is our finest behavior, then, merely a performance for an imagined audience etched into our very genes? Long before we built courthouses or wrote legal codes, we built watchtowers in the sky. The archaeological record and ancient texts speak a universal language of omnipotent, all-seeing eyes. In the scorching Egyptian sun, the god Ra traversed the heavens in his solar bark, his eye not merely a symbol, but an active, punishing force that saw into the hearts of men. The Hebrews worshipped a deity whose knowledge was absolute, who saw every secret act in the darkness. "Thou, God, seest me," whispered Hagar in the desert, a statement of terror and awe. These beliefs emerged independently across continents, from the Greeks to the Maya. They were not mere superstition, they were the foundational pillars of early moral systems. Before a king could enforce laws, before a police force could patrol streets, the idea of a divine witness provided a constant, inescapable supervision. This surveillance morality was the glue that held nascent societies together, a cosmic deterrent against the chaos of pure self-interest. It was the ultimate extension of that primal brain reflex, projecting the feeling of being watched onto the heavens themselves. If law is the body of society, then was this watchful God its original, ever-beating heart? We like to think we have evolved beyond such primitive notions, that our ethics are now self-derived and sophisticated. Yet the watcher has simply shapeshifted to fit the modern world. The unblinking eye of Ra is now the unblinking lens of the CCTV camera on every street corner and the dashboard of every social media platform. We live in a panopticon of our own making, and the effect is strikingly similar to the coffee experiment. Studies consistently show that the mere suggestion of being watched, a picture of eyes, a security mirror, the icon of a like button, can increase charitable donations, reduce littering, and encourage polite behavior. Our modern deities are the abstract eyes of the community, public opinion, and digital footprint. We perform our best selves for this faceless audience, curating our actions under the assumption that someone, somewhere, is always watching. The medium has changed from stone tablets to silicon chips, but the deep-seated psychological trigger remains untouched. Does this mean our civility is forever contingent on the architecture of observation, a dance we perform under any available spotlight? This reliance on an external witness, however, leads us to an uncomfortable and deeply philosophical cliff edge. If we behave well primarily because we feel watched, can we truly call it virtue? Or is it merely sophisticated fear, a calculated avoidance of punishment scaled up from the tribe to the heavens to the digital cloud? It suggests that without a watcher, divine, societal, or electronic, the inner compass might spin wildly, losing its magnetic north. The terrifying question arises, is our morality intrinsic, or is it just a suit of armor we wear in the battlefield of social judgment, easily discarded when no one is looking? This notion challenges the very foundation of what we consider good. If a deed is only good because it is seen, then what is its value in the absolute darkness? Are we truly moral beings, or just excellent actors on a stage we never agreed to, performing for a director we cannot see? This paradox becomes even more stark, more chilling, when we consider it not in the context of good people doing good, but of so-called bad people following a code. What happens when the moral actor, the one who feels the gaze of their own particular watcher, is the same hand that commits atrocity? Even in the most brutal conflicts, Amidst the utter breakdown of civil society, strange rules often emerge. Guerrilla armies and street gangs, entities dedicated to violence, frequently have strict unwritten codes. Do not harm children. Do not betray your brother to the enemy. Show respect to the local population. These are not laws enforced by any external god or government. They are internal rules, a form of honor among thieves. They suggest that the human need for a structured code of conduct, for a sense of right and wrong within a defined group, is so powerful it persists even in the pursuit of what the outside world deems wrong. The feeling of being watched here is not from society at large, but from within the group itself. The eyes of one's comrades, the legacy of the leader, the idealized identity of the warrior. This complicates our simple definitions. It forces us to ask, does morality necessarily mean being good, or does it simply mean being loyal to a chosen set of rules, regardless of their ultimate aim? If even the killer has a code, then what, in the end, are we really talking about when we speak of the watchful eye? The cartel leader's orders were absolute, delivered in a low, chilling monotone. A traitor was to be found. His family was to be made an example of. But then, a pause, a single, non-negotiable amendment. The children, he said, are not to be touched. They are innocent. In a universe defined by brutality, a line had been drawn in the sand. It seems a paradox, a glitch in the logic of pure evil. How can a man who orders the dismemberment of rivals also enforce a code that protects the young? This is not an anomaly. It is a profound pattern. It forces us to ask, why do even killers have rules? We often imagine the criminal underworld, or the heart of darkness itself, as a moral vacuum, a place where anything goes. Yet, time and again, we find it is not a void, but a twisted mirror of our own world, complete with its own strict, often savage, etiquette. The existence of these codes, these unspoken laws amidst the chaos, challenges our simplest definitions of good and evil. It suggests that the human impulse to create order, to draw lines around certain acts, is perhaps more ancient and deeply ingrained than our concepts of law or religion. It bubbles up from a place far older than civilization, from the deep biological bedrock of what it means to be a social creature. This isn't about morality as we preach it, it's about the raw, pragmatic calculus of survival. To understand this, we must journey back, far beyond courtrooms and holy books, to the ancient theaters of life and death. Picture a pack of wolves. The alpha male asserts dominance with bared teeth and fierce growls, yet he will fiercely defend the pups of the pack, his own and others. He is both tyrant and guardian. This duality is not a moral choice, but an evolutionary imperative. In the ruthless arithmetic of genetics, the young represent the future currency of the group's survival. They are the vessels of shared genes, the next generation of hunters and gatherers. To harm them is to sabotage the very engine of one's own genetic legacy. In this light, the cartel leader's decree begins to look less like a moral stance and more like a deeply programmed instinct. The protection of the young is a hardwired investment in tomorrow, a biological rule written in the language of DNA long before it was ever scribed into any law. It is a strategy devoid of sentiment, yet it creates a shadow of what we would call compassion. Is our own cherished morality, then, merely the flowering of a seed planted by the cold, pragmatic needs of survival? This biological whisper from our deep past echoes loudly in the silent stones left by our ancestors. Archaeological digs at ancient burial sites from prehistoric tribes often reveal a telling story. The skeletons of children are frequently found with care, sometimes adorned with beads or buried with provisions for a journey they were too young to take. Evidence of violence is common on adult remains, crushed skulls, arrowheads embedded in bone, but it is remarkably rare to find such trauma inflicted on the young. It seems that even in a world defined by daily struggle and tribal conflict, a line was held. Fast forward to the annals of recorded history, and we see the same pattern emerging through the fog of war. Amidst the sack of cities and the slaughter of armies, there are often accounts, however fragile, of tacit agreements to spare women and children. These were not universal laws, but they were recurring features. They were unstable truces in the midst of carnage, suggesting that the impulse to protect the vulnerable is a thread that runs continuously through the human story, a thread that is sometimes severed by the worst of us, but often picked up again. What does this persistent pattern tell us about the architecture of the human mind? An architecture that can design both the torture chamber and the sanctuary within the same walls. This ancient architecture is not a relic. Its blueprints are still used to build the shadow societies of the modern world. The most violent gangs, the most ruthless mafias, operate with intricate codes of conduct. Omerta, respect, loyalty, never betray your own, never harm the family of a rival. To break these rules is often considered a greater sin than the violence itself, warranting a more severe punishment. This reveals a crucial distinction. Morality is not synonymous with kindness. It is, at its core, a system of rules that enables a group to function. For a gang, morality is what maintains cohesion, ensures trust, and facilitates complex criminal enterprises. Their code is a perversion of our own, but it is a code nonetheless. It creates a perverse sense of honor among thieves and murderers, a shared identity that bonds the group against the outside world. It proves that the human need for belonging and order is so powerful that it will generate an ethical framework, a sense of right and wrong, even when the ultimate aim of the group is to do wrong. So, is the purpose of any moral system, whether in a church or a cartel, ultimately about group cohesion rather than universal goodness? This, of course, leads us to an uncomfortable precipice. If these rules are merely tools for group survival and power consolidation, can we truly call them moral? The cartel boss protects children not out of a selfless love for innocence, but because harming them could invite uncontrollable chaos, unifying rivals and turning the community irrevocably against him. His rule is a strategic calculation, a way to maintain a stable, controllable criminal empire. The gang's loyalty is enforced through fear, a mechanism to prevent betrayal and ensure operational security. In this view, their code is a cynical, self-serving manipulation of our deeper instincts. It leverages the ancient biological impulse to protect the young and the social impulse for group loyalty and twists it to serve a destructive end. It is a predator wearing the skin of a protector. Does this manipulation void the code of any real meaning, exposing it as a hollow sham? Or does the very fact that it must be appealed to, that even the most vicious power structures must cloak themselves in the language of protection and loyalty, suggest that these deeper impulses are an inescapable and powerful force that even evil must acknowledge? Perhaps the answer lies not in the rules themselves, but in what happens to those who break them. The selfish individual, the one who hoards resources or betrays the group, is not simply left behind. He is actively pursued, judged, and punished by the collective. This urge for collective justice to police our own is itself a profound evolutionary puzzle. Why would individuals risk their own safety to enforce rules that benefit the group? This impulse to punish, to create consequences, might be the other side of the same coin, the dark, necessary complement to the rules of protection. If morality can indeed flourish in the soil of violence, then perhaps the hand that delivers punishment is not merely brutal, but is also, in its own twisted way, seeking to restore a broken order. And so we are left with a question that hangs in the air, a bridge to the next layer of the mystery. If the protection of the young is one half of a deep ancient code, is the collective punishment of the betrayer the other?